Well guys, it's finally here. After a whole nother year, I finally managed to wrangle together yet another Glup Shittos Iceberg video. I know it's been a while, but the Death Star took, what, 20 years to complete, and it still got the job done. If you're here, you probably know the gist of things by now. Star Wars has a bunch of funny characters from the backgrounds of the movies and shows, as well as many from the books, comics, games, short stories, RPG supplements, and a whole load of other media. I'm here to talk about some of the most funny and interesting ones, as well as all the extended lore and behind the scenes trivia that makes them even funnier and more interesting than one might ever imagine. Also, in the time that's passed since my last video, my personal Star Wars library has grown quite a bit, so I can check even more primary sources than ever before to ensure the highest levels possible of depth and purity in my Glup Shittos knowledge. Star Wars is full of so many funny little characters that with every video there are sadly ones that ended up left out or had to be cut for time's sake, and I only really wrote at length about the ones that I found the most interesting, so if I ended up missing one of your favorites, as always, let me know in the comments. It is entirely possible that, sadly, this may be the last Glup Shittos Iceberg video I do, as I want to move on to making other kinds of videos, and I think it'd be nice to end this series off as a trilogy. But always in motion is the future, and I still have plenty of Star Wars characters I'd like to talk about at some point that couldn't quite make it into this 3-hour video. So while this might be the last Iceberg video, I might talk about some Glup Shittos again at some point in the future. Maybe the series might somehow return in some other shape or form, perhaps to celebrate a certain time of the year. But for now, you guys have waited more than long enough, so without further ado, let's go ahead and dive right in to the third episode of the Weird Star Wars Characters, Iceberg.
There has been an awakening. Have you felt it?
Boba Fett. In the modern day, you'd be hard-pressed to find anyone who would consider Boba Fett a Glup Shittos. It's hardly worth mentioning that he's one of the most recognizable Star Wars characters of all time, and can probably be named by anyone who's barely familiar with the franchise. However, Fett's origins as a character have all of the hallmarks of being a Glup Shittos at heart that eventually breached containment and into the spotlight. Many seasoned Star Wars fans may already know this, but Boba Fett's first appearance in narrative Star Wars media was not in The Empire Strikes Back, but in 1978's Star Wars Holiday Special, where he appears in animated form as part of a cartoon watched by Chewbacca's son, Lumpy. In the cartoon, he is encountered by Han Solo and Luke Skywalker on a watery moon in the Pana system, and they recruit Fett's help after Han falls victim to a sleeping virus. However, Fett betrays their trust by alerting Darth Vader to the rebels' presence, as he was secretly in league with the Empire. Though Han would eventually recover from the sickness, Fett would rocket away, promising to meet them again. Even before this appearance though, which featured a much different color palette for Fett's armor than we would see in most of his future appearances, Boba could be seen even earlier marching with Darth Vader at San Anselmo's Country Fair on September 24th, 1978. Some cite the true origin of Boba Fett's cult following starting with the release of the Kenner 3 3/4 inch Boba Fett figure, which released later in '78, which was given away for free for people who submitted 4 proofs of purchase of other Star Wars Kenner figures through the mail. The figure was advertised to come with a rocket that could fire out of his jetpack, but the final figure had its rocket glued in place, rumored to be due to a scare caused by the reported death of a child who choked on a plastic missile from a Battlestar Galactica toy, though others instead cite a more complicated combination of manufacturing issues and safety concerns. Regardless of all that though, the toy was an enormous hit, and various paint models and prototypes of the toy have sold for tens or even hundreds of thousands of dollars. Fett's appearance in Episode 5, which totaled up to only 2.5 minutes of screen time and 4 lines of dialogue, is where it seems the mystique around Fett came about in full force. A character who could stand up to Vader with such a cool attitude, as well as the mysterious and unique appearance of his armor and helmet, it seems obvious now that Fett was destined to become a fan-favorite character. Fett's design origins are about as well chronicled as his meteoric rise to fame, and only add to the coolness and intrigue behind his character. The idea of Boba Fett originally came from ideas for the main villain of the first Star Wars film, who was originally envisioned as a rogue bounty hunter or mercenary, but the concept of Darth Vader eventually formed around the idea of a dark warrior more loyal to the Empire. Early concept art for Boba Fett by Ralph McQuarrie and Joe Johnston originally envisioned Boba Fett as a new kind of stormtrooper, a super commando from the planet Mandalore. This shell of a backstory would be adopted as Fett's official backstory in stories like the 1977 Marvel comic series, and the Empire Strikes Back novelization would mention Fett's armor was the kind worn by a group of evil warriors defeated by the Jedi Knights during the Clone Wars. Incidentally, the white Super Trooper concept design and Super Commando backstory would eventually be implemented into Star Wars Rebels to create a faction of Mandalorian super commando fighters who are loyal to the Empire. Perhaps one of the most aura-defining parts of Fett's story is his supposed death, where in Return of the Jedi, a blind Han Solo accidentally smashes his jetpack, sending him flying about until he falls into the Sarlacc pit. The mystery of whether or not Boba Fett survived, given his air of tough badassery which seemed to contradict such a pitiful death, has been one of the most crucial elements of Boba Fett's continued place in the Star Wars zeitgeist. 1991's Dark Empire comic series would eventually reveal Fett as having survived the Sarlacc pit, and he would go on to appear in countless other expanded universe works such as the Fate of the Jedi series, where he would become the ruler of Mandalore. Continuity-wise, perhaps the most interesting bits about Boba Fett involve his depiction in The Last One Standing, The Tale of Boba Fett, a short story from the 1996 Tales of the Bounty Hunters collection that was written by sci-fi author Daniel Keyes Moran, which, among other things, established Boba Fett's true identity to be that of a man named Jaster Mareel. This was the first conclusive word on Fett's backstory in detail, but as we would see in Attack of the Clones, this would be effectively completely retconned, with Boba Fett now being one of the many clones from which the legendary Clone Wars got its name. Perhaps to remedy this, the 2002 comic miniseries Jango Fett Open Seasons introduces the separate character of Jaster Mareel, who betrayed and killed his commanding officer after his group of Death Watch warriors killed some beggars, among which were Jango Fett's parents. This also incorporates a part of Boba Fett's backstory mentioned in Dark Empire, where it's said he was once a stormtrooper who killed his commanding officer. Mareel would mentor Jango and raise him as a Mandalorian foundling, instilling in him a strong moral code that Jango would pass on to his clone son Boba. Additionally, it was further confirmed in Star Wars Insider 80's article, The History of the Mandalorians, that Jaster Mareel was an alias both Boba and Jango used from time to time to hide their identities and honor their heritage. This new backstory would also sort of preemptively reconcile other conflicting details about Jango and Boba's backstories, such as when George Lucas and Dave Filoni asserted through the Clone Wars show that Jango Fett was not a true Mandalorian, which is kind of true from a certain point of view considering he wasn't born one. In homage to all of this, you can partially see Jaster's name in the chain code display of Boba Fett's armor as seen in The Mandalorian. In a somewhat similar vein, who has played Boba Fett, both with and without the mask, has changed quite a bit throughout the years. Jeremy Culloch famously portrayed Boba in the armor in Empire and Return of the Jedi, with Jason Wingreen voicing the character. Temuera Morrison portrays Boba's dad Jango and his adult clones in the prequel trilogy, eventually portraying Boba himself in The Mandalorian and related TV shows. Morrison would also dub over Boba's lines in the original trilogy for their 2004 DVD editions. Daniel Logan would portray Boba Fett without his armor as a child in Attack of the Clones, and would also voice the character in many other projects like the Clone Wars TV show. Daniel would also fittingly voice all of the show's other younger clones, and would also do so in The Bad Batch, and also provided the character's adult voice in LEGO Star Wars The Skywalker Saga. Boba would additionally be voiced by Temuera Morrison and D. Bradley Baker for various other projects in the character's adult timeline. Anyway, bizarre continuity stuff and cool behind-the-scenes facts aside, Boba Fett has obviously become an insanely popular Star Wars character on par with many of the protagonists or more famous villains, with his design and backstory eventually spawning the entire Mandalorian society, which has in itself inspired countless other pieces of media and untold droves of real-world fans to don their own custom versions of Mandalorian armor for cosplay, though no amount of accrued popularity can truly make any character escape Glup Shittos status in my opinion, and all the weird continuity stuff surrounding Boba, some details of which I simply do not have time to get into, is definitely a similarity shared by many of the strange characters I've already discussed in this Iceberg series. It's perhaps telling of Boba Fett's long-lasting and impressive career that the fact that he got his own TV show is very far from the most notable thing about him. Or maybe that's just reflective of the show's quality. I don't know, I personally didn't think it was that awful, even if a good quarter of the show was spent with a different Mandalorian character and a CGI homunculus Luke Skywalker. Bossk. Though not as iconic as Boba Fett, Bossk, or Bossk Wasak Kradosk if you want to use his full legal name, is perhaps the second most famous bounty hunter to originate from the classic bounty hunter lineup seen in The Empire Strikes Back. The debut member of the reptilian Trandoshan species, Bossk was actually originally envisioned in the script for Episode 5 as a slimy tentacled monster with two huge bloodshot eyes and a soft baggy face. Like many Rebel characters in the original trilogy, Bossk wears a real British pilot suit as part of his costume, with Bossk Bossk's specifically having been reused from a Doctor Who serial, The 10th Planet. For his appearance in Episode 5 and a brief background appearance in Episode 6, he was played by the late actor Alan Harris, who played several other minor characters such as stormtroopers in the other Star Wars films. Bossk has had quite his fair share of unrealized appearances in plenty of Star Wars media. Among these appearances that just weren't meant to be were additional appearances in the Clone Wars, specifically for the arc where Cad Bane trains Boba Fett, a draft of the Solo film that had Bossk as Enfys Nest's second-in-command in the Cloud Riders, and the infamous Duel of the Fates Episode 9 script by Colin Trevorrow that had Bossk as a kind of leader or king of the Trandoshans, if I remember correctly. Of course, though, Bossk has appeared countless times in Star Wars expanded media that did get fully finished. He appeared in several Clone Wars episodes where he was aligned with Boba Fett and Aurra Sing, and is a key character in the Bounty Hunters 2020 comic series, where he becomes at different times a friend or enemy of series frontrunner Baylor Valance, a character that will be covered later in this Iceberg. Bossk also showed up in the Halcyon Legacy comics, confirming his survival past at least the events of The Last Jedi. In Legends, stories such as The Mandalorian Armor go into more detail about his heated rivalry with Boba Fett, which ended when Bossk actually managed to defeat Boba after getting stranded on Tatooine. He would eventually retire and run into Han Solo about 20 years later during the Yuuzhan Vong War, where he would learn of Chewbacca's death and gloat about it to Han, leading to a fight that got them both arrested. Like many other Trandoshan characters, he has been seen and described as hunting Wookiees many times as part of his predatory Trandoshan nature, worshipping and hunting for the deity known as the Scorekeeper, and in both canon and legends, flies a Corellian freighter named Hound's Tooth as his personal flagship. Bossk is also notable for being the favorite Star Wars character of my freshman year high school English teacher, who is currently serving a 30-year prison sentence for sharing inappropriate messages and images over the internet with a 9-year-old. Soars Bandim.
Master Skywalker, there are too many of them. What are we going to do?
I really doubt I have to explain to you just how infamous this scene in particular from Revenge of the Sith has become. It's easily one of the most, probably even the most widespread of prequel memes that have ever been conceived. At the very least, a couple months ago when I went to see Revenge of the Sith in theaters for its re-release, this was the scene that people cheered and clapped for the most. As we'll come to the surprise of hardly anyone, hopefully, this little youngling who is the one to approach Anakin in the Jedi Council chambers actually has a name, Soars Bandim, which is a tuckerization of the name of the actor who played him, Ross Beedman, who was uncredited for his role in the film's credits. Beedman said that the role made him popular at school, but that he didn't even know his character had died until friends at school had told him. The iconic scene actually wasn't originally going to be in the film, and it was filmed during the late pickup stage of shooting, and the iconic line was originally supposed to be said simultaneously by all the other younglings in the room, but a subsequent version of a draft used for filming gave Beedman the sole speaking role. The scene took 4 takes to get right, and to scare Beedman, Hayden Christensen shouted "boo" at him, startling him and causing him to take a step back, which we can see in the final film was edited to be a reaction to Anakin igniting his lightsaber. First brother / sixth brother / 11th brother. Since their introduction in Star Wars Rebels, the canon incarnation of the Imperial Inquisitors have given rise to countless characters who mostly serve as secondary antagonists to Jedi survivors of Order 66. Given just how many canon Star Wars stories have since centered on Order 66 survivors in the wake of Episode 3, and how most of the time the Jedi go on to survive those stories, the overall saga requires a lot of Inquisitors to die to keep those plots rolling. One such Inquisitor is the sixth brother, who according to the Ahsoka novel discovered Order 66 survivor Ahsoka Tano in hiding in 18 BBY. Ahsoka would kill the Inquisitor and purify his lightsaber crystals to create her now iconic twin white-bladed sabers. The story for the Ahsoka novel was outlined by Dave Filoni and completed in book form by E.K. Johnston, giving us a clear picture into a pivotal time in Ahsoka's life. But this same story outline would be retold in animated form with the Tales of the Jedi miniseries, where Ahsoka would face another Inquisitor on another farming world in an uncannily similar series of events. I won't go into too much detail on the debate surrounding the canonicity of these two conflicting stories, with the two camps generally being that the animated version is the same event but with some details missing, or that they are two different events which are just very similar, though considering Ahsoka joins the rebellion for good after her Inquisitor encounter in either story, no solid reconciliation of the two stories seems clear right now. Even reference material given after after the fact, such as the 2024 Star Wars Encyclopedia, is vague on which version or versions of events is the more accurate. Making this question even more complicated is the identity of the Inquisitor that Ahsoka kills. For some time, the Inquisitor in the Tales of the Jedi episode was unidentified, so some simply assumed him to be the sixth brother as told in the book, even though the Tales Inquisitor looks much different than how the sixth brother appears in any other source. The Tales Inquisitor would eventually be revealed in the 2024 Star Wars Encyclopedia as the first brother, making the two Inquisitors separate, but still not really clearing up the story discrepancy. But even then, it turns out that this Inquisitor isn't even the first brother at all. Due to a miscommunication, this Inquisitor was given the wrong name, as the first brother moniker was meant to go to Marok, the mysterious Inquisitor that explodes into a cloud of green fart gas in the Ahsoka series, and has since shown up in Tales of the Empire alongside the other first brother, and will appear in Maul Shadow Lord. But later, in an issue of Star Wars Insider, the Inquisitor from Tales of the Jedi was confirmed to be the 11th brother. Mouse Droid. The Mouse Droid, or the MSE-6 series repair droid, if you want to get technical, is an extremely common model of droid that can be seen nervously scurrying the floors in all films of the original and sequel trilogies, as well as Revenge of the Sith, Rogue One, and countless episodes of the franchise's animated and live-action shows. In most of their appearances, they exist basically to just run away scared from or bump into characters that are otherwise engaged in far more important business. Mouse droids were manufactured by the Rabaxan Columni Corporation on the planet Chad, and were used by various factions of the galaxy, including the Republic, Separatists, Empire, and First Order, with their design staying virtually unchanged through the decades. They had many different uses, including making repairs, cleaning floors, relaying messages, and guiding troops to their posts. Though they were unsophisticated by most droid standards and frightened easily, they could complete certain complex tasks, and were so ubiquitous throughout the galaxy that they were often also fitted with additional hardware for those who wanted to use them for slicing or spying. The droids were first designed for, of course, A New Hope, where one is briefly focused on as it crosses the path of Luke, Han, and Chewie, the latter of which scares the droid off with a loud roar. In case anyone was curious, the name of this particular droid is MSE-6G735Y, and was featured in a Certain Point of View story where the Stormtrooper TK-421, the one who had an affair with Grand Moff Tarkin, dreamed of taking it to Coruscant to have it compete in races with other droids. Though very little in terms of concept art or original design pitches from George Lucas exists to reveal the origins of the mouse droid, the Empire of Dreams documentary does show that it was called Baby Box during filming. The droids were achieved practically through simple remote control robots, and were done digitally in Revenge of the Sith for the scene when they scurry away from Anakin as he prepares to slaughter the Separatists, which George Lucas wanted to use to give the scene an impression of rats leaving a sinking ship. General Veers. Maximilian Veers, known to most simply as General Veers, appeared briefly yet prominently and imposingly in The Empire Strikes Back before and during the Battle of Hoth, where the general led the Imperial assault on Echo Base from an AT-AT walker named Blizzard 1. Though the original script as well as the novelization for the film showed Veers' death as the result of a suicide charge from rebel pilot Hobby Clivian, the scene never made it into the final film, leaving his fate ambiguous for years. He was originally planned to reappear in Return of the Jedi, but scheduling conflicts with the character's actor, Julian Glover, stopped this from happening. Expanded universe sources would go on to fill in other areas of Veers' career, such as the video game Empire at War, where Grand Moff Tarkin states that Veers himself designed the AT-AT Walker. The new Essential Guide to Characters details his rise through the Imperial ranks and the loss of his wife, which led to him becoming fiercely devoted to his work in the Imperial military, eventually coming into the good graces of Darth Vader. Also, according to the guidebook, he was severely injured during the Battle of Hoth and lost the use of his legs, forcing him to use a repulsor lift carriage to move about, and though his victory at Hoth gave him some months of fame, his son's defection to the rebellion and Vader's death at Endor led to the downward spiral of Veers' career. In 1994, the comic series Dark Empire 2's first issue would show Veers' ultimate fate during the Battle of Balmorra, where he would be sent unceremoniously by the reborn Palpatine's military executor Cedrus on a suicide mission. The man who played Veers, English actor Julian Glover, though aware of Veers' fate in the novelization, said in a 2017 interview that he thinks that Veers survived and he could be brought back if Lucasfilm wanted it to be so. Glover's other prominent roles include Indiana Jones villain Walter Donovan and the voice of the giant spider Aragog from the Harry Potter movies. Glover's son Jamie would continue the Veers tradition by voicing the character in video games Battlefront 2 and Empire at War, as well as doing minor voice work for Knights of the Old Republic 2, The Force Unleashed 2, and the Old Republic MMO, for the latter of which which Jamie would voice Darth Malgus in a trailer. After the canon reset, Veers would appear as an antagonist in a few LEGO specials, in one of which he would be voiced once again by Julian Glover. In the Empire Strikes Back edition of the From a Certain Point of View short story collection, Veers' fate would be revisited in the short story The Truest Duty, which highlighted his unwavering loyalty to Darth Vader. In this story, the AT-AT would come under attack from Hobby Clivian's damaged fighter and badly injure Veers' legs, similar to his Legends history. He would be saved, however, by the Walker's pilot, Lastok, or TK-7834. The name of the man who saved Veers links to perhaps one of the most interesting aspects of Veers' character in modern times, which is George Costal, a real-life man who runs the Veers Watch Twitter account, which dutifully checks each piece of new Star Wars media for unlikely appearances of General Veers. Since 2020, Veers has appeared a couple more times, including, surprisingly, the pre-Phantom Menace novel The Living Force, where he serves as a junior officer in the Republic Navy. As noted by The Rise and Fall of the Galactic Empire, records of Veers are very scant after the Battle of Hoth, perhaps indicating that in canon, though he survived, the general's injuries were too severe to allow his career to continue. Crix Madine. If I say the name Crix Madine, a good number of you probably have no idea who I'm talking about, but if I show you a picture of this guy from Return of the Jedi with a bizarre case of helmet hair and obviously fake beard, then the confusion will probably be cleared up. Madine appeared in Episode 6 for the Rebel briefing scene aboard Home 1, played by Irish actor Dermot Crowley, where he explains the plan to use a stolen Imperial shuttle to sneak a team onto Endor to deactivate the second Death Star's shield generator. His expanded history reveals that he used to be an Imperial Army officer and commando before defecting, and both continuities see him work for the New Republic after the Empire's defeat at Endor. Other expanded universe details about Crix Madine include that he was rescued by Kyle Katarn in the Dark Forces video game after leaking information on the Death Trooper project, and that he's proficient in Corellian boxing. In Legends, he would eventually die in the novel Darksaber, a decision that was extremely disliked by a small but vocal group of fans at the time, according to Star Wars author Jason Fry on Tumblr. Canon, though, doesn't have a much better prognosis for him, as he's rumored to have died during a bombing on Chandrila, and as of right now, doesn't have any appearances after that event in the novel Aftermath Life Debt. Other than naturally some other minor appearances in original trilogy-related books and comics, Madine is scarcely relevant to the wider Star Wars saga. Perhaps the most well-known behind-the-scenes trivia about Madine involves his famous fake beard, which was used because Kenner's action figures for the character had already been made by the time they started filming his scenes, and they portrayed Madine with a beard, though the actor had arrived on set clean-shaven. Madine would also be in alternate scenes shot for Return of the Jedi, where he is seen commanding rebel forces in Admiral Akbar's place, as it was uncertain whether Akbar's complex animatronics would work consistently in all of the film's scenes, but Akbar went off without a hitch, and these extra scenes were not used in the final film. General Dodonna. Another similar, minor yet well-known Rebel Alliance character from the original trilogy is General Jan Dodonna, the older bearded guy who gives the Death Star trench run briefing and oversees the Battle of Yavin in A New Hope, where he's played by Scottish actor Alex McCrindle. He does little else other than what I just described in the film, and is often remembered for slightly mispronouncing Princess Leia's name.
An analysis of the plans provided by Princess Leia.
In both Legends and canon, he is from the planet Comenor and served the Republic before continuing his service in the Imperial Navy, where he would eventually defect and become instrumental to creating the Rebel Alliance. Because he doesn't appear in the other original trilogy films, his absence has been explained in expanded media. In Legends, he would appear in the original 1977 Marvel series on Yavin, but Vader would eventually capture him, eventually being sent to the hidden prison ship Lusankia, where he would be freed by Corran Horn in the X-Wing novel series, going on to serve the Republic for another 15 years and retiring on New Alderaan, passing away peacefully. By contrast, in the new canon, Dodonna would be killed at Mako Ta while holding off Imperial forces sometime between episodes 4 and 5, allowing the Rebel Alliance to escape with new Mon Calamari ships and personnel. The decision was made to kill off Dodonna and other key Rebel Alliance members in the 2015 Marvel Comics series to explain how Luke, Han, and other characters climbed the chain of Rebel command so quickly in between films. The character also has other appearances in Star Wars Rebels, where he's voiced by Michael Bell, as well as in Rogue One and Andor, where he's played by Ian McElhinney. Garandon, Imperial Spy. An alien character with a cloak, hood, goggles, and a long snout is infamous for ratting out Luke and Obi-Wan to the Empire in Mos Eisley during the events of A New Hope, causing stormtroopers to bear down on the Millennium Falcon just before its crew and passengers leave Tatooine. Though his appearance is brief, he's become quite the well-known character, especially among fans of the LEGO Star Wars games, where he earned his most popular moniker of simply Imperial Spy. Though he has an expanded role in the game as a boss fight, he's sometimes described as the worst character in the game, as once he's unlocked for free play, his attack button instead just pulls out a useless walkie-talkie. His funny, unique appearance, especially when rendered in LEGO form, as well as his distinct squeaky language, which actually comes from processed dialogue from John Wayne movies, has given him enduring recognition. The character's true name is Garandon, or fully Garandon as Zavor, as revealed in the new canon. I seem to not be able to find exactly where the character's name first came from in Legends, but his species of Kubaz seems to have come from the novella adaptation of the Dark Forces video game. Expanded sources describe Garandon as a greedy spy for hire who contributed his skills to the highest bidder, and that though the spy profession was very common among the semi-insectoid Kubaz, Garandon was considered one of the best. Other than some old RPG supplements and young reader adventure books though, Garandon has virtually no other notable story appearances outside of A New Hope, let alone any that explain much more about his background or history before or after Episode 4. Eventually, we would get The Secrets of Long Snoot, a from a certain point of view story by Delilah Dawson, which elaborates on many obscure details of Garandon's backstory, such as that he's from a very respectable hive on his homeworld of Kubindi, and that he has numerous successful children and grandchildren who are senators, artists, academics, and more. The story also reveals that he ended up on Tatooine during a quest to secure riches enough to free his homeworld from the Empire, and though he successfully reported R2 and 3PO, he did not secure the bounty that he so desperately needed. TC-14. TC-14 is another very minor character from the films whose relevance in the Star Wars community is greatly boosted by her appearance in LEGO Star Wars. A feminine protocol droid serving the Trade Federation aboard the Lucrehulk flagship Sakak, TC-14 appears to greet Obi-Wan Kenobi and Qui-Gon Jinn as they board the ship to prepare for negotiations. While her presence in the film ends when the Jedi are ambushed by toxic dioxis gas and battle droids, in the LEGO games, she accompanies the two Jedi as they work their way through the ship, allowing the player to familiarize themselves with unlocking protocol droid terminals. Though that still seems like an incredibly small role, because the negotiations level is the one players must play first to unlock all the other films and levels on a new save file, TC-14 sticks out in the minds of many as a recognizable Star Wars character. Though she's one of the very first characters to appear chronologically in the Skywalker saga, she has very little outside lore in either Legends or canon. She doesn't even feature in a single other story other than various adaptations of the events from Episode 1, with perhaps the most extensive piece of media concerning her being a mission from LEGO Star Wars The Skywalker Saga, where the player is tasked with chasing down a Neimoidian to confirm that her memory had recently been wiped. As such, one of the only relevant pieces of reference lore concerning the character is that she has received so many frequent memory wipes that she's perpetually confused and has basically no personality. Also, just a brief note to add while I'm editing, despite appearing in 2005's LEGO Star Wars The Complete Saga, TC-14 wouldn't receive an actual LEGO figure until a polybag release in 2012, which goes for hundreds of dollars online nowadays. TC-14 was voiced in The Phantom Menace by Lindsay Duncan, who had originally auditioned for the role of Shmi Skywalker, and according to an interview in Star Wars Insider 48, said that the film was the only work she had ever done that impressed her young son. Anakin's childhood friends. In The Phantom Menace, during the parts of the film that take place on Tatooine, young Anakin Skywalker is seen to have a gaggle of friends his age, or at the very least a group of acquaintances that pick on him for his pod racing hobby. In no particular order, the two human girls are known as Melee and Ami, seemingly no relation, and the kid that wants to go play ball,
Come on, let's go and play ball.
is named Seek. These three seem to have little on them in terms of trivia or lore in Legends or canon other than their appearance in the film, except for the fact that Ami was played by George Lucas's daughter Katie, and that her braces apparently evidence the existence of orthodontists that serve child slaves on Tatooine. The same can't quite be said for Anakin's two closer friends, the human Kitster Benai and the Rhodian Wald, the latter of which is played by Star Wars veteran Warwick Davis. Both were part of Anakin's pod racing pit crew during the Boonta Eve Classic and have some notable appearances in other media, most of which relate back to Anakin and or Vader himself. And just to clear up a common misconception real quick, no, Wald is not a younger version of Greedo, though Greedo does appear as a different Rodian child in Episode 1's deleted scenes. Kitster and Wald would both appear in the Legends novel Tatooine Ghost, which takes place about 4 years after Return of the Jedi and sees Leia and Han undergo a mission to Tatooine to try and recover a painting that holds secret rebel codes. During their mission, they would come across a grown-up Kitster who through Leia would learn of Anakin/Vader's life and give Leia a data cube that showed an image of what Anakin was like prior to his fall towards the dark side. This, along with Kitster's other memories of Anakin, allowed Leia to forgive her father and let go of her fear that her children may end up like him, explaining the difference in her more hostile opinion of Anakin/Vader in the Truce of Bakura, and her more accepting attitude towards him in later Legends material such as the Thrawn Trilogy and Dark Empire. Wald also appeared in Tatooine Ghost in a somewhat less critical role, but was revealed to have inherited Watto's parts shop, renaming it Wald's Parts, and would also eventually meet Leia and Han, though he would refuse to believe that Anakin and Vader could have possibly been the same person. Both characters also appeared in the now defunct Star Wars Galaxies MMO, where Wald gets a questline dedicated to him which involves the player helping him with various jobs. Let's check in on what Kitster's up to in the game.
Hell no, man. What the fuck, man?
Well, it seems that life on Tatooine has not been kind to Kitster. Not only does he look like this, but after having been repeatedly framed for instigating slave revolts, murders, and other crimes, he would need the help of the player to clear his name, giving the player Anakin Skywalker's pod racing helmet as a reward. In the new canon, Kitster, Wald, and Anakin's other friends, Seek, Mali, and Ami, would also survive at least up until the original trilogy era, having been freed from slavery by Padme's handmaiden Sabe to leave peacefully on a colony on Gabrador III, at least until Darth Vader arrived to save the colony from an unscrupulous governor and a horde of Tangor beasts. In this continuity, Kitster and the others so far have not learned of Vader's true identity. Chancellor Valorum. Finis Valorum appeared first in The Phantom Menace as the one who served as Chancellor of the Galactic Republic before being ousted with a vote of no confidence due to his inability to control the Senate bureaucracy and solve the Naboo taxation crisis, all engineered of course by Senator Sheev Palpatine, who took his place shortly afterwards. Born on Coruscant and hailing from a distinguished political dynasty, Valorum rose the political ranks in his younger years by choosing challenging assignments such as breaking corruption as a judge on the frontier world of Vekacopia, instead of getting ahead the easy way through simple nepotism. Despite his moral and hardworking nature, he lacked charisma and was generally underestimated by both his enemies and friends who knew little of him other than his prestigious surname. In the Legends novel Cloak of Deception, acting on the advice of Palpatine, Valorum would levy taxes against areas controlled by the Trade Federation, which eventually led to their aggressive actions seen in Episode 1. As for other Legends media, he made a brief appearance in the Republic series of comics, where he would meet an explosive end during the Clone Wars at the secret behest of Palpatine. This, however, would be contradicted by his chronologically later appearance in the Clone Wars 3D show, where Yoda would visit him at his apartment when looking for clues about Jedi Master Sifo Dyas. Valorum was played by English actor Terrence Stamp, who was excited to be directed in such a film by George Lucas and thought more of his role than just a one-dimensional cameo, but was ultimately disappointed with his experience because he couldn't read the full script and all his scenes were shot on an isolated blue screen. Stamp explained in an interview with Star Wars Insider that Lucas described the character of Valorum as a good man but beleaguered, a bit like Bill Clinton, though he noted that this was before President Clinton's impeachment trial. The name Valorum also has some interesting trivia behind it. It seems to have originally come from an early draft for The Star Wars, where Valorum was a prince of the Knights of Sith, acting as a sort of pre-Darth Vader character who was an enforcer of the Empire. The name Finis Valorum can be translated from Latin as meaning the end of values, representing Chancellor Valorum's place in history and role in the fall of the Republic. Newt Gunray. Newt Gunray was a Neimoidian who was the powerful viceroy and head of the Trade Federation, a mega-corporation so powerful that Gunray represented the company in the Galactic Senate. Gunray overall was quite cowardly, seeking solely to maximize his company's profits almost exclusively through cutthroat tactics, and was easily susceptible to being manipulated by the Sith to ascend the Federation's ranks and eventually blockade Naboo as part of Darth Sidious's grand convoluted master plan to rule the galaxy. Unexpected to either Sidious or Gunray, the blockade of the planet Naboo would be ended on the battlefield, after which Gunray was subject to many trials and hearings to bring him to justice. Though Gunray avoided heavy consequences due to his near bottomless budget for legal fees, the whole ordeal would naturally draw Gunray and the Federation towards the separatist movement led by Count Dooku, another manipulation by the Sith. Throughout the Clone Wars, Gunray would become a key member of the Separatist Alliance and would be captured by the Republic after trying to have Padme Amidala assassinated multiple times. Though he would be freed by Asajj Ventress, he could do little in the chaos of the end of the war and would eventually be sent to Mustafar to be cut down by Darth Vader, secretly the same boy who was instrumental to ending his blockade on Naboo years prior. You probably already know the majority of Nute Gunray's lore already, as he's an important player in the prequels and Clone Wars show and doesn't have many important appearances outside of that, but his behind-the-scenes trivia is considerably more interesting, in my opinion. Nute Gunray and the Trade Federation as a whole were created by George Lucas to critique the practices and ideologies of real-world Republican politicians. In fact, Lucas named Nute Gunray after Republican Congressman Newt Gingrich, and was particularly critical of Gingrich's Contract with America agenda, which Lucas and many others saw as corrupt as it aimed to reduce government and cut taxes, much to the benefit of real-world corporations similar to the Trade Federation. Lucas also had Ronald Reagan in mind when creating the character, as Reagan had once infamously referred to one of his defense programs as Star Wars without Lucas's permission. So yeah, the next time someone tries to tell you that Star Wars isn't political or biased against right-wing politics, just show them a picture of everyone's favorite Neimoidian. Gunray was also the cornerstone debut member of the Neimoidian species, which was originally designed as looking very similar to the eventual depictions of the Geonosians in the next film. In fact, the reason the battle droids in the Phantom Menace look the way they do was because their Neimoidian owners originally looked far more similar to them, though this explanation would still eventually be incorporated, with the Geonosians later revealed as being the ones to manufacture the droids. Gunray was voiced by Silas Carson, notably with a Thai-inspired accent, a perhaps questionable choice that to this day draws considerable criticism and accusations of racist subtleties. Poggle the Lesser. Poggle the Lesser was a Geonosian who acted as the public leader of Geonosis and its population during the time of the Clone Wars and the final years of the Galactic Republic. Though he acted as Geonosis' leader, he was actually himself controlled by Queen Karina the Great. Poggle oversaw the planet's battle droid facilities and even played a crucial part in the Death Star's earliest stages of planning. Like the other Separatist leaders though, his rule would come to a hot cauterized end at the point of Darth Vader's lightsaber at the end of the Clone Wars. Similar to Nute Gunray, Poggle the Lesser is a well-known prequel villain that, though recognizable by fans for his unique design and distinctive voice, doesn't have much significant lore in expanded media outside of a few minor appearances in novels that focus on the Death Star's history. I just finished reading Catalyst for the first time at the time of writing the script, and early in the book there's a few pretty interesting scenes where director Krennic convinces Poggle to help the Republic begin building the secret battle station, only for Poggle's drones to go insane and start dismantling everything as a cover for Poggle to escape back to the Separatists, which probably explains why Palpatine didn't much mind him getting sliced up by Vader. All in all, the behind-the-scenes information on Poggle's inspiration and performance is a bit more interesting than his in-universe history. He was portrayed through CGI from Industrial Light and Magic after Jar Jar Binks served as the launching point for the technology, and was voiced by Ernie Fosselius, the creator of what is often considered the first well-known Star Wars fan film, 1978's Hardware Wars. He accomplished Poggle the Lesser's unique voice by recording his dialogue, then playing it backwards, imitating the sounds of his own backwards talking, and then adding in other sounds such as Swahili-inspired clicking noises and the sound of him blowing onto a piece of paper. Aurra Sing. Aurra Sing is definitely a Glup Shitto in the classical sense. In her debut appearance, she showed up in literally a single shot of the Phantom Menace during the Boonta Eve pod race, but once you've crossed a certain line into Star Wars fandom, it seems like there isn't anybody who doesn't know her name. A pale-skinned, long-fingered, near-human Paladuvin, Aurra Sing was originally, as told by the Star Wars Republic Legends comic series, actually a Jedi initiate who was taken from her spice-addicted mother by an unorthodox Jedi known as the Dark Woman, who, as you could probably tell from her name, has her own whole deal going on that I don't really have time to get into right now. Trained for 7 years by the Jedi, she would eventually become captured by pirates and tricked into believing the Jedi wanted to sell her into slavery. From there, she would eventually travel the galaxy and receive 4 different educations in killing, as well as a biocomputer implant in her head that heightened her awareness. After killing her Hutt masters, her pirate kidnappers, and a number of Jedi, she would eventually take up bounty hunting, initially not under the guild, but with Bosk's dad, Kradosk. 2 years years after attending the Boonta Eve pod race, she would accept a job to kill her whole Jedi Master, but failed, and would eventually reappear during the Clone Wars to do a number of jobs alongside Boba Fett and Bossk for employers such as Zero the Hutt and Cad Bane, training the young Boba in the process. In Legends, she would continue to live for decades later due to the long-lived nature of her mysterious species, living to the age of 90 through to the Second Galactic Civil War, portrayed in the Legacy of the Force series of books. In canon, however, she was originally meant to be killed in an unproduced episode for Season 6 of the Clone Wars, and her death at the hands of Tobias Beckett would be revealed in a line from Solo, A Star Wars Story. Captain Typho. Captain Gregor Typho, played by Jay Lagaia, not sure how to pronounce that right, in Attack of the Clones, was captain of Naboo's Royal Security Forces and Padme Amidala's personal bodyguard. Originally, his character's role was meant to be filled by Quarsh Panaka, who is Padme's security chief in Episode 1, but when Hugh Quarshie, Panaka's actor, wasn't allowed to see the full script for the film, he declined to be in it, and the character of Typho was created to fill in. Perhaps to link the two characters further in that sense, Typho is in fact Panaka's nephew in-universe. In the current canon, Typho doesn't have too much interesting lore outside of his actions in Attack of the Clones, such as when, in the beginning of the film, he confidently states that there's no danger to Padme right before her ship violently explodes, as well as his brief appearance in Revenge of the Sith. In the 2020 Darth Vader Marvel comic series, he joins the Amidalans' rebel cell along with Sabe to figure out more about Padme's death, though he does get killed by Darth Vader and his Death Troopers. He shows up kind of randomly in the LEGO Star Wars Skywalker Saga game when he accompanies Yoda in the confrontation against the newly appointed Emperor Palpatine. I guess because they literally could not think of anyone else that would make sense to appear as a second playable character for that level. In Legends, he does appear in the 2006 book The Last of the Jedi: Death on Naboo, which revealed his first name and also his original death. Ultimately, his Legends death is pretty similar to his canon one. He died at the hands of Darth Vader after trying to assassinate him after learning that Vader had something to do with the death of Padme. He would appear 3 years later in the Star Wars Galaxies MMO, which canonically would have taken place almost 2 decades after he died, but considering what the game has already done to Kitster, I think it's safe to say that continuity junkies probably shouldn't be taking the events of Star Wars Galaxies all too seriously. Lor San Tekka. Lor San Tekka, played by Max von Sydow in the opening sequence of The Force Awakens, is one of the first characters to appear in the sequel trilogy and the first person the audience sees relaying the map to Luke Skywalker, but is otherwise pretty unimportant as far as most movie watchers are concerned. Anyone who would manage to secure a map to The Last Jedi who wanted to remain hidden must be fairly important though, and expanded media portrays San Tekka as one of Luke's closest friends during his efforts to rebuild the Jedi Order in the Disney canon. Though not Force sensitive, Lor was a member of the Church of the Force, an underground religion originally developed for George Lucas's Star Wars Underworld series. The Church kept their faith in the Force and the Jedi even during Imperial rule. According to the Force Awakens visual dictionary, his efforts to preserve Jedi lore during this time made him someone that many people sought out for spiritual knowledge, including eventually Luke Skywalker. He also helped the New Republic by providing them with information on many of the galaxy's worlds whose information was destroyed by the Empire. Lor San Tekka, using his knowledge of the Force and experience with galactic exploration, helped Luke Skywalker find the compass that led to Ahch-To, the site of the first Jedi Temple. Though the complete route to Ahch-To was only known to Luke, San Tekka's contributions meant that he held a piece of the map to get there, explaining why he had at least part of the map in The Force Awakens even though Luke wanted to stay hidden. Prior to Luke's exile though, he can be seen in the book Shadow of the Sith and the comic series The Rise of Kylo Ren, helping Luke secure other obscure bits of Jedi knowledge and explore ancient Jedi temples. Poe's Black Squadron spends much of the series trying to track down San Tekka across the galaxy through worlds such as Cato Nemoidia. After being freed by Poe, San Tekka would go on to assemble his piece of the map and rendezvous with Poe on Jakku, hoping for a symbolic beginning of the end for the First Order on the same planet that the Empire came to its demise on 29 years prior. San Tekka would die at the hands of old family friend Kylo Ren, but would live on in a major yet indirect way in other Star Wars media. Other than his future comic and novel appearances, of course, the San Tekka family was developed into a large clan that was prevalent back during the High Republic era. In those times, the San Tekkas were successful and wealthy hyperspace prospectors who wielded considerable political power, and one member, Mari San Tekka, was a Force sensitive who was captured by the villainous Nihil to help chart their unorthodox hyperspace routes. Bazine Natal. Bazine Natal was a human mercenary, bounty hunter, and spy for hire who can be seen wearing a form-fitting bodysuit and hanging out with everyone's favorite Dawutin Grumgar in Maz Kanata's castle in The Force Awakens. Natal, played by actress Anna Brewster, has a very brief role in the film, alerting the First Order to the presence of BB-8 on Takodana, but has received some extended appearances in print media. Reference sources explain that Bazine Natal was an orphan born on the planet Chaktil 2 years before the Battle of Yavin, and eventually trained under a combat school owned by Kanja Club. Natal was the main character of the short story The Perfect Weapon by Delilah Dawson, which premiered about a month before The Force Awakens and was collected with the paperback edition of the film's novelization. The story details a job Natal does for an anonymous client to steal a case owned by a former Imperial stormtrooper, leading her to infiltrate a nursing home and kill another elderly former stormtrooper to complete the job. She would also appear extensively in the junior novel Lando's Luck and the Flight of the Falcon series of Star Wars Adventures comics, where she would go on a long search for the Millennium Falcon, taking her to various worlds such as Lotho Minor, Felucia, and Corellia, running into the likes of IG-88, Embo, and Lady Proxima, eventually learning that the Falcon was being used by Honda Onaka on Batuu, a reference to the Smuggler's Run ride at Galaxy's Edge Disney theme park. FN2199. FN2199, colloquially known as TR-8R or Traitor among many fans, was the First Order stormtrooper that confronts Finn with an electro baton during the Battle of Takodana, nearly defeating his former comrade before being absolutely obliterated by Han Solo with Chewbacca's bowcaster. Before he died, though, he made great use of his said weapon and clearly made quite the impression on audiences. His single line, "Traitor!" shouted by Skywalker sound editor David Ackard, quickly turned the character into a meme for those who appreciated his tenacity in battle and dexterous use of his baton. His backstory is expanded a bit in the novella Before the Awakening by Greg Rucka, a book that came out on the same day as The Force Awakens and explained part of the backstories of Poe, Finn, and Rey. Finn's portion of the book includes many of the troopers he once served alongside, including FN2199, who went by the nickname Nines. Nines is among troopers who executed civilian workers who had gone on strike at a mining facility in the Precis Tumble asteroid field, while his friend FN2187 quietly refused, foreshadowing the latter trooper's defection in Episode 7. Bulio. Bulio was an Ovisian who made a brief but important appearance in The Rise of Skywalker, where he provides the Resistance with key intel concerning the First Order, sending off Finn and the Millennium Falcon with a spirited, "Win the war!
Win the war!
Listen, I know this movie gets a lot of flack, but all Star Wars movies have great little lines like this from minor alien characters. My brother and I used to repeat this to each other all the time. Win the war! Win the war! Win the war! Speaking of which, Bulio's voice was actually provided as a cameo appearance by Mark Hamill himself, credited in the film as Patrick Williams, which is a combination of his two brothers' names. Soon after his collaboration with the Resistance, Bulio would be killed by Kylo Ren, more specifically, decapitated. The fact that his head would eventually be severed and carried around by Kylo was a key factor of the character's design, though no shots of Kylo slicing his head off or carrying the head around made it into the final film. We just get to see his head dramatically slammed on a table. I guess that's another mark on the list of awesome creature features that somehow didn't make it into Episode 9's final cut.
You know you can't trust those little freaks.
R2-Q5. This black and orange astromech droid character, I would wager, has probably the biggest ratio of people who happen to have seen him compared to how much relevant information people actually know about him. If that sounds kind of confusing, let me explain. I first learned of R2-Q5, as I'm sure most others did, from his appearance in LEGO Star Wars The Complete Saga, where he appears as an unlockable player character only after beating every level in the game, or after entering the cheat code Evil R2. When I was little, I had always assumed that R2-Q5 was an Easter egg from some expanded universe game or other story, explaining his unusual level of secrecy in the game, but he's actually straight from Return of the Jedi. The droid can barely be seen in the background during the scene when Vader confers with Jerjerrod in the second Death Star's hangar at the beginning of the film. R2-Q5's role on the station, unbeknownst to anybody that would be watching the film, was actually quite vital. According to Legend sources, the droid was tasked with storing the Emperor's plans for the battle against the rebels and managing the hyperspace coordinates on Palpatine's personal shuttle, as well as more mundane duties such as maintaining the station's weapons and security systems and servicing TIE fighters. During the Battle of Endor, he even thwarted IG-88's plan to take over the second Death Death Star, a plan you might remember if you watched the last video or have read IG-88's story in the Tales of the Bounty Hunters collection. If you're wondering what the source was that revealed all this information, it's actually from informational cards that came with the droid's action figure from the Power of the Force line from the early 2000s. Amazingly, the new canon has preserved basically all of this same lore background for R2-Q5, also through collectible cards, this time from the Force Collection digital trading card game. Ledik Firest. With a name like Ledik Firest, this character must either be one of the most powerful or one of the silliest Star Wars characters to ever be conceived, and I'm extremely happy to tell you that this character is basically both. Ledik Firest is the name given to a particular rebel trooper that can be seen fighting the Empire during the Battle of Hoth in Episode 5, where he sports a truly stupendous mustache. Probably not many people remember him too well from the films, where he is shown in a scene valiantly rallying his troops for battle, but his representation in LEGO has spread recognition of this character far and wide, even among those who have never heard the name Ledik. This mustache in his various LEGO and other action figure incarnations isn't precisely accurate to the one that he sports in the film, but it's still nonetheless stupendous in every version, and the character's brief action in a cutscene for LEGO Star Wars The Complete Saga is equally as impressive, as he defends his fellow rebels with an absurdly large Gatling laser gun. Ledik Firest as a character actually was established well after The Empire Strikes Back, first in the West End Games supplement book Assault on Hoth from 1988, and would also be used in later RPG guidebooks. In these resources, he was simply identified as a rebel field officer stationed on Hoth in charge of Echo Base's defense, but wasn't linked to any character from the film. It wasn't until 2013 that the name Ledik Firest was linked to the mustachioed rebel from Episode 5 with Issue 5 of the relaunched official Star Wars Fact File magazine series. According to 2008's Complete Star Wars Encyclopedia, Ledik was a colonel in the Rebel Alliance whose prowess in battle owed to his prior training under mercenaries, and the men under his command survived more battles than any other group in the Alliance. His survival in the Battle of Hoth is ultimately unconfirmed, though. In Episode 5's novelization, it's implied that the mustached rebel died in an explosion after charging a downed AT-AT, but given that the fates of other key characters such as General Veers were later established to be different than what's shown in the novelization, the possibilities for the continuation of Ledik's story are endless. It's also probably worth noting that Ledik should not be confused with another mustached rebel from Hoth, Major Bren Durlin, who was the one who gave the order to close Echo Base's shield doors while Han was out looking for Luke at night. Beezer Fortuna. Bib Fortuna is far and away one of the most recognizable and beloved Glup Shittos in Star Wars history, but perhaps the only thing better than a Glup Shitto is a Glup Shitto's cousin. Beezer Fortuna, like his cousin Bib, was a pale, skinny male Twi'lek, but it seems their life goals were considerably different. While Bib went to work for Hutt Crime Lord Jabba, Beezer would go on to work for Saw Gerrera's rebel partisans. In his first appearance in Rogue One, if you look in just the right place as Cassian and Jyn enter Saw's fortress, you can see him sitting at a Dejaric table and staring with a frozen expression of what might be concern, disgust, confusion, or all of the above. According to the Rogue One Ultimate Visual Guide, Beezer was present during the Separatists' occupation of Ryloth during the Clone Wars, which inspired him to become a freedom fighter when the Empire also sought to control the world. He would be captured by the Empire but freed by Saw Gerrera, ultimately joining Saw's forces. His survival after the destruction of Jedha is unconfirmed, though he doesn't seem to be among the remaining partisans shown in the 2015 Marvel Comics series. According to Pablo Hidalgo on Twitter, the character was named Cousin Bib during production and was based on early designs for Bib Fortuna from Return of the Jedi's production. As such, Hidalgo incorporated those details when making his name and backstory. His first name, Beezer, originates from another early detail of Bib Fortuna, who at one point during Return of the Jedi's production was heralded as the High Beezer of Hoth, with Beezer's apparent original meaning being the title of a ruler or something similar. Oma Trace. Oma Trace was a human bartender that made a very brief appearance on Kijimi in The Rise of Skywalker. He's only really relevant because he was played by John Williams, who, of course, wrote the scores for all the main 9 Saga films, providing the franchise with nearly all of its recognizable motifs and themes that are such a critical part of the Star Wars experience. As such, Oma Trace's name is a Tuckerization of the word maestro, and the character's databank entry says that the character has heard his share of discord, and on an occupied Kijimi Kijimi, the drums of war are part of the soundtrack of life. Trace can only hope the present strife will reach its crescendo and be followed by an era of harmony. The props behind him in the film, though not all of them are visible, are references to other films featuring Williams' work, such as a whip from Indiana Jones, a time turner from Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, some yellow barrels from Jaws, and a clothes iron from Home Alone. John Williams had originally turned down the role, believing it would be silly for him to appear in the film, but his wife immediately convinced him otherwise when she found out, claiming that his appearance would be more important than doing the score of the film, which I personally find debatable. With Kijimi's destruction at the hands of the Final Order, though, it is unknown whether Oma Trace would survive to see the galaxy come to an era of peace once more. Meeber Gascon. Meeber Gascon was a diminutive being who nonetheless had a fiery and steadfast personality who served as a colonel of the Grand Army of the Republic since the onset of the Clone Wars. A green-skinned Zilkin from Great Zilk, Gascon was designed based on unused concept sculpts for the character that would go on to become Jar Jar Binks. With his first claim to fame being his service as a cartographer during the First Battle of Geonosis, he would be brought into the galactic spotlight when he was assigned to lead D-Squad, an eclectic group of droids, on a mission to steal a separatist encryption module needed to decrypt messages intercepted from General Grievous. This mission, as portrayed in the Clone Wars show through a collection of 4 episodes commonly called the D-Squad arc, would see Gascon and the droids R2-D2, WAC-47, QTKT, U-9C4, and M5BZ stumble through the galaxy to such perilous locales as a separatist dreadnought, the desolate planet of Avafar, and the Karita system, where they would successfully steal the encryption module but become stranded on Avafar after a comet shower. On Avafar, Gascon would wonder if he were dead, bemoaning that life was a void and that death was the only certainty. His droids would encourage him to trek further though, where they would eventually reach the town of Pons Ora to find a stranded and amnesiac clone commander Gregor, who would seemingly sacrifice himself to aid their escape. They would meet up with the Republic Star Destroyer Renown, only to find it deserted and rigged to explode by the Separatists, who hoped to destroy those attending a Republic strategy conference containing many important Jedi and Republic personnel. Despite losing BZ during the mission, Gascon rallied his squad mates with a memorable speech, and the remaining droids managed to detonate the ship before it could damage any other Republic vessels. After the mission, the droids of D-Squad would be assigned to Gascon through the rest of the war, and Gascon's heroics caused him to be promoted to Brigadier General, as he had long aspired to. The 4 episodes of the Clone Wars that Gascon appeared in have long been ridiculed by fans, as it's judged with being both too self-serious and too lighthearted, as well as simply being too strange or unusually dark and philosophical for the series, though George Lucas has said that A Sunny Day in the Void is his favorite episode in the whole show, at least partially due to it borrowing imagery from THX 1138, his first feature film. Despite the high note that the D-Squad arc ended on, Gascon himself has appeared little afterwards. 2 brief non-canon comics from Star Wars Insider shed some light on Gascon's potential fate. One comic shows that Gascon was forced to work at an astromech droid support company as a customer service associate, while another sees an alternate take on D-Squad composed of Astro Meh, Honky Tonk Gonk, Cal QL8, and K2H2O. Meeber Gascon also apparently plays some important role in the Star Wars expansions for the Disney Infinity game, but I could find little information or footage about this online. AL-1L3. AL-1L3, or Ali, was a droid first seen briefly in the background of The Rise of Skywalker at the Resistance base after the galaxy's triumph over Palpatine during the Battle of Exegol. Backstory provided by the Rise of Skywalker Visual Dictionary tells that Ali was present for the droid revolution on Kessel led by L337, and that droid inspired Ali to pursue independence and rebuild herself as a cargo hauler to work for other droids. She seems to have joined the freedom fight for beings both mechanical and organic quite early on, as 37 years before joining Lando Calrissian in the Citizens Fleet against the First Order, she can be seen at the Rebel base on Yavin 4 in similarly brief background appearances in Andor Season 2. Ali was originally conceived by concept artist Jake Lunt Davies as a possible design for Solo's L337, and her qualities of femininity paired with poncho and blasters were key design elements that Davies was fond of. She was portrayed physically by Swedish actress Stephanie Silva, who portrayed a number of other aliens and droids for the other sequels, Rogue One and Solo, and according to her Instagram, accidentally uppercut another actor with one of her guns on set while in costume. Dexter Jettster's waitresses. Dexter Jettster is quite famous among Star Wars fans for his role in Attack of the Clones, his friendship with Obi-Wan Kenobi, and tangential yet key relevance to the plot, though is perhaps most important for the diner that he runs, the eponymous Dexter's Diner. But of course, no good diner can be run by just one basilisk, and Dexter has 2 documented waitresses on staff to help him run his business. The first is Flo, a feminine service droid that rolls around on a single wheel. She's the only one of Dexter's waitresses to have any lines in the film, and she can be seen in Lego form in Dexter's Diner in the first Lego Star Wars game. According to her old page on the Star Wars databank, she disliked low tippers and could often be seen flirting with the diner's dishwasher unit. Her name, Flo, is a reference to a character from the 1980 sitcom Alice, which in turn was based on the film Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore, directed by George Lucas's friend and fellow director Martin Scorsese. A human waitress, Hermione Bagua, can be seen in the film too, though she has no lines. She's played by Australian actress Susie Porter, who also voiced the lines for Flo the droid, so one way or another she got a speaking role in the film. Legends lore from the Star Wars Fact File magazine and an interview with Dexter himself from Star Wars Insider 65 reveal that Hermione was rescued from filth and poverty in Coruscant's lower levels by Dexter and was deeply loyal to her employer as a result. According to an RPG sourcebook, she eventually took over the diner after Dexter's apparent retirement after the fall of the Empire. Both Flo and Hermione came from the same original character concept of Dexter's wife, though neither character would act quite as such in the final film. There is also possibly a third waitress at Dexter's Diner, Wanda, though her existence is somewhat debatable. She's referenced as her own independent human character in the recently released Star Wars Encyclopedia, but Flo the droid has been referenced as Wanda multiple times, such as in Star Wars Detours and in the LEGO Star Wars The Skywalker Saga game. Orn Free Taa. Orn Free Taa was the senator of Ryloth during the waning years of the Republic and afterwards, and was, despite appearances, a Twi'lek. Orn Free Taa sports a number of unique physical traits for a Twi'lek, and no, I'm not just talking about the fact that he's a big chunky boy. Has 4 fingers on his hand instead of 5, and 2 extra Leku head tails coming from the back of his head. According to the Star Wars Complete Visual Dictionary, obese Twi'leks actually do store excess fat in their Leku, but I suppose Orn here just got so big he grew 2 new ones and had to store fat in the rest of his body. No canonical explanation has been given for his missing fingers, though some suspect that he could be a subspecies of Twi'lek we just haven't seen other members of yet. His fatness, which seems to be what he's mostly remembered for by many fans, perhaps appears to be a physical manifestation of what Orn is meant to represent thematically, which is the idea of a corrupt politician who works only to enrich himself while neglecting his people, which he plainly does throughout his appearances in the Clone Wars and the Bad Batch. Orn was immensely unpopular on Ryloth, a world rocked by war, slavery, and other issues, but somehow Orn made it to be one of the more senior and influential members of the Senate, and also is partially responsible for enhancing Palpatine and Mas Amedda's power. Though there's little to be said about the Senator's fate after Episode 3 in Legends, Orn has bafflingly narrowly escaped death on more than one occasion in the new canon. In the Bad Batch, when unrest began to mount on Ryloth, he would be threatened by freedom fighter Cham Syndulla, then shot in the head by clone commander Crosshair in order to frame Cham for violently murdering an Imperial senator. The shot must have been a special round though, or the senator's blubber must have protected his brain, because Senator Taa would survive to appear in chronologically later media such as the novel Lords of the Sith. In that book, he would be force choked by Vader but spared by Palpatine, and later was on the Star Destroyer Perilous when it was destroyed, but escaped with his life from that as well. KP-1. KP-1 was a K-series astromech droid that can be seen operating with a hidden path on Jabeam in the Obi-Wan Kenobi series. KP-1's design was done by Camille Manet, a Star Wars fan from France, as a part of the Build My Droid contest held by Lucasfilm for its Force for Change charity initiative. Manet grew up watching the original trilogy on home video and the prequel trilogy in theaters, and after the release of the sequel trilogy reawakened her interest in the franchise, she began thinking subconsciously about a droid that could help her in her daily life, and began designing a droid for the contest without any background in robotics or art. KP-1, whose name stands for Knave Puff, reflecting its cute but mischievous personality, was meant to be familiar to the design language of droids already present in the franchise, but also with brand new features. As such, the droid sports a fairly typical astromech droid head, but also an unusual half-circle wheel it uses to get around, with tools held within the wheel and its cone-shaped body. She designed the droid to be pink and cream colored to avoid colors used by the franchise's most famous droids, C-3PO, R2-D2, R2-D2 and BB-8. Ultimately, other than a color change to green, KP-1 ended up very close to Manet's original vision. Doug Chiang, Lucasfilm's lead art director, called Manet during the design process to update her on tweaks made to the droid so it could make it to the screen. The droid can be seen 5 minutes and 12 seconds into Obi-Wan Kenobi's 5th episode, offering food to a child and later helping close a door. Manet was very touched by seeing the droid end up in the Kenobi show, as Obi-Wan was always her favorite character growing up. Runner-up winners for the contest included the 4-legged T0J4 by Rei Yasaki and the wrist-mounted QT5 by Ana Gabriela Lopez Espinosa. Vinay. Vinay began life as a Star Wars character with an appearance in a single scene in Rogue One, no more than 3 shots or so, where he appears simply as a robed old man who walks into Vader's bacta chamber to tell him that Director Krennic had arrived at the Dark Lord's fortress. Since that brief appearance, Vinay has become more important to the lore surrounding Vader and his castle than one could possibly imagine. Once just a lowly Imperial inspector, Vinay was driven mad by the inhalation of lava fumes that emanate from Mustafar's underground lava deposits, and subsequently became an obsessive servant of Vader at his fortress, aiding his Dark Master with a pseudo-religious fervor. During his time with Vader, he would be present for a wide range of dark and bizarre events, many of which are detailed in the comic series Tales from Vader's Castle, Return to Vader's Castle, Shadow of Vader's Castle, and Ghosts of Vader's Castle. From being kidnapped by Mustafarians and defending the fortress from plague-infested stormtroopers, to fending off stranded rebels, Inquisitor impersonators, and even the Knights of Ren, Vinay was involved in more than his fair share of misadventures and tomfoolery. At some point, he would anger Vader, causing him to be locked in a dungeon at Vader's fortress, where Vader would not remember to set him free before he died over Endor, but Vinay managed to convince some young Mustafarians to set him free. Vinay tried to resurrect Vader with dark magic, invoking the immortal gods of the Sith, but it didn't do much other than give some kids some nightmares before Vinay ended up getting trapped inside horrifying illusions of Vader himself. Perhaps Vinay's most important role has come more recently with the ongoing Legacy of Vader comics, which show Kylo Ren retracing Vader's life story after The Last Jedi in order to learn more about his grandfather's journey towards the dark side. It's revealed here that Vinay was able to access Emperor Palpatine's files on Vader after the Battle of Endor, learning about Vader's life and eventually using such knowledge to guide Kylo Ren to worlds such as Tatooine and Naboo. However, Vinay's immense age was such that he was little more than a head in a jar attached to a droid body by 34 BBY. Timeline-wise, Vinay's latest appearance, though not really canonical, comes from the LEGO Terrifying Tales special, where Poe Dameron and BB-8 travel to Vader's castle after the Battle of Exegol, where Vinay, not restricted to previously mentioned droid body, regales Poe with scary tales and what-if scenarios from throughout galactic history before diving into a pool of lava to go after a Sith holocron in a decidedly Gollum-like fashion. Though Vinay's original actor from Rogue One, Martin Gordon, has sadly recently passed, let's hope that Vinay will continue to haunt all those that dare enter Darth Vader's fortress for years to come. Magaluf. Magaluf is a Leffingite from Almach whose claim to fame is loudly shouting, "What the?" while witnessing Obi-Wan hanging from a flying droid while soaring through the night skies of Coruscant in Attack of the Clones. One might assume from his exclamation at such reckless behavior that he would be a stand-up citizen, but Magaluf actually made a living as a speeder thief. He would receive an extensive backstory in 2006 from online Star Wars supplement author Gregory Walker, who wrote the story behind the story segments for many prequel-era Glup Shittos, and later reflected that Magaluf's story was his favorite. Magaluf stole the speeder we see him driving in the film, eventually giving it to crime boss Hat Low, with the act allowing Magaluf to join Hat Low's gang. Magaluf would then end up working a job with Ahmed Beck, who promised Magaluf entry into the wider criminal underworld with the likes of Black Sun. After pulling a series of successful heists, Magaluf would steal a number of valuable flame gems from a jewelry store in Cocoa Town, but would get his quarry snatched by Daniel Fay-Tony, who was masquerading as a Republic lieutenant. Magaluf would be arrested for his crime and sentenced to 3 years in the moderate security ward of the Cocoa Penitentiary. He used the time to rethink his life, and upon his release, went back to his homeworld of Almach to begin his life anew. Gregory Walker named Magaluf's species after Lee Leffingwell, who had at the time recently been elected to the City Council of Austin, Texas, and for whatever reason, the name stuck in Walker's head, causing him to come up with the Leffingite species. Walker wonders if the councilman ever learned of that particular piece of Star Wars trivia. Magaluf's single line in the film is voiced by Matthew Wood, who would go on to voice Grievous in Revenge of the Sith. Pruneface. Ori Marco, sometimes more widely known as Pruneface, was a wrinkly-headed Dracelian who served the Rebel Alliance. He can be seen faintly in Return of the Jedi during the first Rebel briefing scene aboard Home 1 shortly after Han Solo's rescue with a couple other Dracelians, and can also just barely be seen during the celebration on Endor at the end of the film. RPG supplement sources from Legends would establish him as a governor of an area called Sri Harlo on Dressel, and join the Rebel Alliance to help free his homeworld at the behest of the Dracelians' allies, the Bothans. Like most of the aliens in the original trilogy, his name and species were not known until well after the release of the media they originally appeared in, though the Kenner action figure would call him Pruneface, a name used for the character during production. Before the naming of the Dracelian species in the 1995 sourcebook Galaxy Guide 12, Aliens, Enemies and Allies, many suspected that the wrinkly-headed aliens may have been some of the Bothans spoken of by Mon Mothma, though 1991's Heir to the Empire would establish Bothans as a separate race. Ori Marco specifically was named after Orin Marco, a friend of prolific Star Wars reference writer Pablo Hidalgo. Psi-O. The scene in The Empire Strikes Back where Han, Leia, Chewie, and 3PO hide in an unusual cave to flee from the Empire in the Hoth asteroid belt, only to discover that the cave is in fact no cave, but an enormous space slug, is one of the franchise's many iconic moments and is a fantastic example of the series' consistency in creating exotic new alien designs, exciting action set pieces, and unique visual shots. Derived from a concept sketch by Ralph McQuarrie, the idea of the slug took inspiration from the biblical tale of Jonah and the whale, which has come to symbolize a part of the middle of a story where the characters find themselves in a treacherous environment to face a difficult trial. Naturally, being an original trilogy species, the space slug, eventually dubbed the Exogorth, would go on to feature in more Star Wars stories like the Knights of the Old Republic comics. However, something few would expect is that this specific space slug would become a character in its own right. Few, though, may be surprised that this is due to the From a Certain Point of View series. Similar to the Dianoga from Episode 4, this Exogorth, dubbed Psi-O, surprisingly has its own internal monologue and is sentient in its own way. The short story This Is No Cave by Catherine M. Valente details Psi-O's birth and unfathomably slow growth across the eons in the vacuum of space, raised by its parents and feeding on mineral-rich meteors as it grew in hummed poems without beginning or end. Its name, Psi-O, meant in its language the color of unloneliness. Psi-O would journey through the road of all moons, an effectively endless trek through the galaxy where the Exogorths floated through space towards the deep core, back through towards the rim, only to come back around again, a bogglingly slow quest whose limitless duration the Exogorths did not mind. Psi-O would eventually come to ingest Minox from a shipwreck in space, which came to form a self-sustaining ecosystem within its pressurized silicon-filled insides, an arrangement that Psi-O considered the manifestation of love. Sadly, this act would be considered pedestrian by other Exogorths who had learned to safely harbor creatures from relatively more exotic planetary environments, so Psi-O continued its journey alone with the creatures it believed to be beautiful. When the Millennium Falcon came to land in its stomach, it would sense the Force strong in Leia, as well as the love between Leia and Han, and hoped that the new denizens of its stomach would stay forever to be safe from galactic strife. However, as we know, the Millennium Falcon would leave the strange cave, much to the despair of Psi-O, who desperately didn't want them to leave, causing the space slug to desperately lunge out at them to keep them inside. Psi-O would remember the rebels for well over a century after their departure: the scoundrel, the metal one, the screaming beast, and the glowing woman. The Two Tubes brothers. Edrio and Benthic Two Tubes are two characters that have appeared frequently in Rogue One, Solo, Andor, and related Rebel-focused media. Members of the Tognath species hailing from Yar Tonga, the two were eggmates, meaning that when their eggs were being nurtured in suspension jelly, they grafted together, which according to the tradition of their homeworld meant that they shared a special bond as if they were brothers. Born in 32 BBY, the same year as the invasion of Naboo, Edrio and Benthic would flee from their homeworld after the Empire conquered it, inspiring them to become dedicated freedom fighters. Benthic appears to have been the more active of the two, joining the Cloud Riders pirate gang led by Envis Nest, as seen in Solo, though both eggmates had joined Saw Gerrera's partisans by 5 BBY, as seen in Andor. After following Saw to such worlds as Segra Milo, Dakar, and finally Jeddah, Benthic would be the one to bring Bodhi Rook to Saw in Rogue One. Sadly, Edrio would die in the blast from the Death Star shortly after, but Benthic would survive to carry the partisan legacy, creating a fragile alliance with Luke, Leia, and Han against the Empire on Shu Torun during the Galactic Civil War, and settling with the remaining partisans on the quiet world Solobia, possibly to secure a more peaceful future, as seen in the 2015 Marvel Comics series. Arodia Ventifoli, and Lulio Primak. As with many other Glup Shittos, you may not know these characters' names, but if you've seen the movie they're from, then they likely left just enough of an impact to be remembered. In this case, we're discussing the gold-dressed human singer and her green, smooth-voiced alien-in-a-jar companion from Solo, A Star Wars Story. Seen on Dryden Voss's star yacht First Light in the film, Arodia Ventifoli was the stage name for a human singer who, according to the Solo official guide, was very high in demand but persuaded to an extended residency on Dryden's yacht for a heaping helping of credits. Other reference lore notes that the microphone she uses actually was a multi-vocoder that boosted her voice to frequencies non-human species could hear, and that her dress was made of a material called corded auropyle, which is the same material used to make Supreme Leader Snoke's golden robe. Her companion, Lulio Primak, was a Galusian, a diminutive species that required submersion in formaldehyde to survive. Described as having passed his prime by the time of Solo, Primak previously also worked as a holo movie actor while wearing a more humanoid-shaped exosuit. Lulio Primak's name is a corruption of Louis Prima, a famed American jazz musician, and Prima's son, Louis Prima Jr., actually contributed the voice of Primak for the film, but his performance was redubbed by a different performer to get the deep voice we hear in the film's final cut. The song that the two characters sing in the film is called Chicken in the Pot, a Huttese song that follows a conversation about what the two singers want to eat. This supposedly came from the original idea to have Lulio Primak be designed as a creature that looked like a cooked chicken, which I think can still be seen in the final design. As such, other songs Primak is known for singing are Your Love is Gravy and Carve Your Name in My Heart, as well as a cover of the Huttese Life Day song Joe Blasto, which first appeared in the LEGO Star Wars Holiday Special. Both characters haven't seen much attention in other sources, but did appear in an advertisement in the background of Bad Batch Season 2 episode Faster. Wade Rassellian. Wade Rassellian was a member of the Hidden Path, a covert group that sought to save refugee Jedi from the Empire. Wade was perhaps one of the first to die in the name of the Path, with his T-47 airspeeder being destroyed by the Inquisitor Third Sister during the Path's rescue of Obi-Wan Kenobi on Nur. There's virtually no other relevant information about Wade, in-universe or behind the scenes, but the emphasis placed on his death in the show and the sadness shown by fellow Path member Sully Stark caused Wade to be turned into a kind of meme. For example, many YouTube videos of the scene of his death and the comments underneath them ironically mourn the loss of the character, who had maybe less than 2 minutes of screen time. Unlike some other criticisms levied toward the Kenobi show, this one seems to be all in good fun, as a Glup Shitto being awarded this much attention to their deaths in-universe is actually pretty unusual. I definitely don't remember this much mourning being shown for far more legendary rebels like Admiral Akbar or Nien Nunb. But nonetheless, Wade Rassellian lives on in the hearts of many who feel for the brave souls that helped the remaining Jedi find safety during the reign of the Empire. Sin Dralig. Sin Dralig was a Jedi Master who served as the Order's Battle Master, or top lightsaber instructor, and Chief of Security during the last few years of the Republic, being known as one of the most skilled duelists in the Order's history. He was regarded as being second only to Master Yoda himself, and as mentioned in the Legends novel Labyrinth of Evil, Count Dooku believed that even General Grievous would be no match for him. Dralig had a hand in instructing just about all of his contemporary Jedi in the art of lightsaber dueling, including galactic legends such as Obi-Wan Kenobi, Anakin Skywalker, and Zed Jukasa. He was, however, a harsh teacher, leading many in the Order to call him the Troll. The character made his debut in Revenge of the Sith, where he can be seen dueling the newly christened Darth Vader in the Jedi Temple security hologram. Dralig's skill, sadly, wasn't enough to defeat Vader, who dueled him and two of his students, Bean and Wee Malraux, at the same time. Such was his final strength, though, that he killed many of the clones that entered the temple, and Vader sought it necessary to deal with him personally. Had Dralig not been distracted with protecting his students, who knows if he could have stopped Order 66 single-handedly. Though he only appears briefly in the film, he's actually an important boss in the game when the player plays as Vader, and a dark side version of him can be played if both players select Dralig in the game's duel mode. Sin has also a couple of brief appearances in the Clone Wars show and in some Legends books, and many Legends reference sources note Dralig's teachings of having survived in the Great Holocron, a massive holocron full of the Order's most important teachings that Luke Skywalker would eventually recover and use to rebuild the Jedi Order. Sin Dralig was played by Nick Gillard, the stunt coordinator for the entire prequel trilogy, and his first and last names, when reversed, spell out Sin Dralig. Nubs. Nubs is a member of the furry blue Pooba species from Mil Nob that is one of the 3 central protagonists of the Young Jedi Adventure series for preschool-age kids, which takes place during the High Republic era. Though he is one of the main characters of the show, alongside his friends, human Kai Brightstar and Pantoran Liz Soleil, Nubs is prime Glup Shitto material thanks to his cute, marketable appearance and lack of ability to speak Basic. In fact, Nubs' little grunts and noises in the Poobian language are voiced by D. Bradley Baker, who, among other minor roles, was, of course, all of the clone troopers in the Clone Wars and the Bad Batch. For most characters in these videos, I like to write a brief synopsis of a character's in-universe history to give an impression of what the character is like, but considering this show is broken into countless, relatively self-contained 11-minute episodes without much of an overarching plot, I don't think there's much you need to know about the canonical history of Nubs other than he's a silly little guy that likes to go on adventures and sometimes fight pirates with his fellow younglings. There are 2 episodes where Nubs meets an adult Pooba and one where he finds a mural of an ancient Pooba Jedi, which I think is pretty cool. Though the show doesn't have a huge audience outside of very small children, parents of said children, and absolute canon completionists, Nubs has broken containment somewhat into the larger Star Wars sphere due to, as I said, his cuteness, which for Star Wars translates pretty directly to marketability. There are countless plushes and figures of him, and he also has a Lego figure that comes in a set that has perhaps the most egregious piece-to-dollar ratio I have ever seen. Young Jedi Adventures and its original characters have been mentioned very little in other Star Wars media so far, but a reimagining of Nubs as Darth Nubs did appear in the Rebuild the Galaxy Lego animated series alongside Darth Jar Jar and Darth Rey. Around the time of the release of Young Jedi Adventures, many people joked that they were excited for the series finale, which would presumably involve the slaughtering of all of the younglings in the Jedi Order at the hands of Darth Vader. However, considering that the series takes place about 214 years before Revenge of the Sith, I'd put money on Nubs' safety, at least from the machinations of the Sith. Darth Talon. Darth Talon is a Twi'lek Sith who appeared in the Legacy comic series, which details events that happen over 130 years after the original trilogy in the Legends continuity. A member of the heretical One Sith Order led by Darth Krayt, she's quite a major player in the story and attempts many times to seduce the series protagonist, Cade Skywalker, to the dark side, sometimes quite literally. I haven't quite gotten around to reading the Legacy comics quite yet, so I won't go into too much more detail on Talon's in-universe story, but it seems that most people in the Star Wars community don't exactly know Talon too well for her role in those comics, but for simply being one of the most memorable and visually striking female Star Wars villains as a Darth Maul-like Twi'lek that wears revealing clothing. For me personally, it seems that Talon's unrealized appearances in Star Wars are more interesting than her official ones. She was originally slated to be a major character in the cancelled Battle of the Sith Lords game, with her inclusion in the game actually being a proposition straight from the mouth of George Lucas. This would not be the first time Lucas would want to use an attractive female Twi'lek from the expanded universe in one of his projects. The team for the game actually even changed the premise to be about a descendant or clone of Maul due to Talon being alive over 100 years after Maul's life. Though Battle of the Sith Lords never got made, Talon was also heavily considered for Lucas's version of the sequel trilogy, which had Maul and Talon leading a criminal underworld that would try to undermine the New Republic. She was considered to be one of the major villains of these films, and much of the action would have surrounded her, and she would have been the one to corrupt the son of Han and Leia to the dark side according to early drafts, though ultimately the two ideas would kind of become one and the same, morphing into the Jedi killer character that would eventually become Kylo Ren. It seems that Talon's potential involvement in the sequels wasn't ever well developed besides some interesting pieces of concept art, though according to Paul Duncan, author of the Star Wars Archives books, Rihanna was brought up in discussions to one day play Talon. With Talon being tossed around by so many creators and her potential place in the timeline ever shifting, it's a bit of a wonder how she hasn't appeared in some capacity in the new canon, although it seems that that could actually change pretty soon. During the announcement trailer for the new show, Maul Shadow Lord, we can see Maul encountering and maybe considering training a new pink-skinned Twi'lek character. It seems this show might realize many of George Lucas's ideas concerning Maul's criminal empire with a female Twi'lek as his Sith apprentice. Baylor Valance. Baylor Valance is a human cyborg character that originated in the original Star Wars Marvel comic series and has continued to appear in comics to this day almost 50 years later. Starting with Valance's first appearance with Marvel Star Wars issue 16, his character's original motivation was to kill Luke Skywalker solely because he had 2 droids help him on his quest to destroy the Death Star. How Baylor even caught wind of the events of A New Hope or why he decided to go after Luke instead of any of the other galaxy's denizens with droid companions is beyond me. As we discover discover at the end of issue 16, Valance is actually mostly cybernetic, with a human-looking synth skin covering, who hates droids due to their acceptance in society, contrasted with the stigma shown towards cyborgs. After finally tracking down and defeating Luke in issue 27, C-3PO would try and protect his fallen master, which caused Baylor to show them mercy and undergo a paradigm shift, and after some soul-searching, decided that he would dedicate himself to protecting Skywalker and his droids from the Empire. His journey would end in a climactic battle with Darth Vader, where Valance disappeared into a corrosive lake, sacrificing himself to keep Luke's identity and whereabouts a secret. After this, Baylor effectively disappeared from the expanded universe, despite being a very distinct and well-loved character. Valance, like many older EU characters, would eventually make his way into the newer canon, though his road back to relevance and his newfound degree of importance in the new continuity is honestly pretty surprising. Valance's first named appearance in the new canon would actually come in the Han Solo Imperial Cadet comic miniseries, where he's shown as a stormtrooper recruit who serves alongside Han at the Battle of Mimban, becoming grievously injured. This is effectively an expansion of the character's original backstory as a wounded stormtrooper from Legends, though in Legends some of the details were different and Han wasn't involved. Similar to the original comics, Baylor would be constructed as a powerful cyborg and be rejected by the Empire, becoming a bounty hunter and this time holding a fierce loyalty for Han. He would be the de facto main character of the Bounty Hunters 2020 comic series written by Ethan Sachs, which I won't summarize here as I haven't finished those quite yet and I don't want to spoil myself, though I've read up through Crimson Empire at the time of writing this, and all the comics from this period are a lot of fun. Valance gets beat up and rebuilt what feels like every other issue. Bafflingly, Valance's original expanded universe incarnation would actually get a new continuation and conclusion with Star Wars issue number 108, which was released in 2019 for the 80th anniversary of Marvel Comics. This is one of the very rare examples of expanded universe or Legends content being released after 2014. In this story, Valance would be reclaimed from the Ruby Flame Lake after the fall of the Empire and would search for the mystical Great Life Jewels, which Valance believed could restore him to full humanity. Whether or not he succeeds in getting the jewels and restoring himself, I am also deciding not to spoil here, so you'll have to find out Valance's ultimate fate, at least according to one continuity, on your own. Gallius Rax. Gallius Rax is a character who plays a key role in the new canon concerning the fall of the Empire and the transformation of its remnants into the First Order. Most of Rax's history is detailed in the Aftermath trilogy. If you haven't read those books, the gist of Rax's backstory is essentially that he was groomed by Emperor Palpatine after a life as a poor orphan on Jakku and served as one of Palpatine's most secret confidants, entrusted with Palpatine's contingency plan in the event that he was killed. Effectively becoming the leader of the Empire after the Battle of Endor, Rax would manipulate events to draw the New Republic to Jakku in a bid to destroy both it and the parts of the Empire he deemed unfit for the contingency. Rax's plan would fail though, as loyal Imperial and Rax's rival Rey Sloane would kill Rax before he could destroy the planet Jakku itself, though she honored his wishes by leading the Imperial remnants into the unknown regions where they would eventually coalesce into the First Order. I know I basically just spoiled most of his important details for those of you who haven't read those books, but they've been out for about 10 years now, and in my personal opinion, Rax's background and plans are probably some of the most interesting parts of a book trilogy that can be a little rough to get through otherwise. There are also some fairly complex continuity kerfuffles regarding how the Aftermath trilogy lines up with the relatively recent Battle of Jakku comic series, which retells many of the same events, but I don't feel qualified enough to get into all of that right here. Because Rax is generally considered to be one of the more interesting parts of the Aftermath trilogy, the book's perceived flaws notwithstanding, perhaps the most notable part of Rax's character in the fandom's collective consciousness is that up until very recently, we had no idea what he looked like. Rey Sloane, a similarly important character from the same series, did eventually receive some character portraits, though she debuted long before Rax in 2014's A New Dawn, and has been in much more media in general. It wasn't until the Battle of Jakku miniseries, 8 years after his introduction, that Rax would be officially pictured, and even then his face was shadowed as if the comic artists were trying to troll readers and prolong his official appearance reveal as long as possible. His face would finally be shown in a variant cover for Republic Under Siege number 4, where he is shown to be a pretty standard white guy with a white streak in his hair. Empatageos Brand. King of Ganath, Empatageos Brand was a Jedi who, after surviving Order 66, crash-landed on Nar Shaddaa after an encounter with Darth Vader. He He would be rescued by the nearby people of Ganath, who reconstructed him, giving Brand a sphere-like body that could float on repulsor lifts with built-in lightsabers in his mechanical arms. Brand would eventually become king of the people of Ganath, who served him loyally and regarded him as holding great honor. Brand was introduced in the 1992 Dark Empire comic series, which saw Luke, Leia, and Han deal with the resurgence of the Empire under a cloned Emperor Palpatine. During the adventure, the Millennium Falcon would narrowly escape from Nar Shaddaa after a deadly encounter with Boba Fett, and Brand would give Han and Leia safe refuge and repairs, joining the fight against the Dark Empire. He would prove extremely adept in battle, his mechanical body not inhibiting his use of the Force or his skill with a lightsaber. Though Luke Skywalker hoped that Brand would join him in his quest to restore the Jedi Order, Brand would sacrifice himself on Onderon, ultimately landing the final blow against Palpatine. When Palpatine tried to desperately transfer his spirit from his aging clone body into Anakin Solo, Leia's newborn son, Brand would capture Palpatine's spirit in his own body and drag the Emperor with him to the netherworld of the Force to ensure that he would never return to endanger the galaxy. Brand's background lore would be expanded in the new Essential Guide to Characters, where it was revealed that Brand was Yaddle's last Padawan, as well as in the game Jedi Starfighter, where he has a brief appearance as a name attached to one of the game's fighters. A Republic HoloNet news briefing from Star Wars Insider 65 also details a battle on the volcanic world Basadro, where Brand led his clones into battle against the Separatists. Sadly, Brand has few other appearances or mentions, and it seems we'll never quite know what he looked like before his mechanical transformation. His unique appearance and heroic sacrifice to take down the galaxy's greatest threat, though, has made him a favorite among EU readers for decades, and though it seems very unlikely, I personally hope that someday we'll see some version of him in newer canon media. Buckets of Blood. Torben Buck was a Chagrian who served as a Jedi Master during the High Republic era. A reoccurring character in the all-ages comic series High Republic Adventures, Master Buck was a healer and known for being calm, honest, and a good teacher and protector of the Jedi younglings and Padawans in his care on the vessel Starhopper. He did, however, have one bizarre trait that disconcerted some of the Jedi trainees in his care. Whenever he leapt into battle, Master Buck would announce himself as Buckets of Blood, a nickname he gave himself. He explains in the second issue of the series that he calls himself that because he's a healer, hoping to keep all of people's blood inside their body and therefore save lives, seemingly unaware that his name comes across as having the opposite effect. Daniel Jose Older, the author for the High Republic Adventures comics, explained during a live stream for the High Republic Initiative that the name came from his experience as a paramedic, where there were legends among his co-workers of a fellow paramedic who referred to himself as Buckets of Blood. This mysterious individual would refer to himself in third person on the radio, announcing that Buckets of Blood is on the way when responding to an EMS call, something that Older was pretty sure paramedics were never allowed to do. Dirge. Dirge is a legendary bounty hunter who most will likely remember from the 2002 Star Wars Clone Wars 2D animated series. He's the premier member of the Gendai species, named after series director Genndy Tartakovsky, whose traits included near immortality and indestructibility. The Gendai species, not the director. This was due to their bodies being made out of a tangle of muscles and nerves that held no set shape, so many Gendai inhabiting the galaxy wore armor to give themselves a humanoid form and blend in a little better on inhabited worlds. Due to their extreme strength and toughness, Gendai made powerful fighters, though Dirge was a rare example of a Gendai who actually possessed enough natural aggression to pursue bounty hunting. Dirge's most prominent on-screen appearance is in Chapter 4 of the Clone Wars micro-series, where he battles Obi-Wan and his clone companions on Munilin on behalf of the Separatists. Dirge was eventually defeated after leading a battalion of lance-armed IG droids to joust against Republic troops and surviving General Kenobi in a duel where the Jedi's lightsaber had little effect. But he was eventually blown apart by the Force after trying to crush Kenobi inside his own body. Thanks to his Gendai physiology, though, he would survive. His background, as explored in the Prototypes story from the Star Wars Visionaries graphic novel and in his old database entry, explains that Dirge was trained to fight by a Mandalorian named Jang about 2,000 years before the Clone Wars. After undergoing surgeries to enhance their fighting capabilities, the two would pay their doctor by protecting him from other Mandalorians who wanted to steal a Sith artifact in the doctor's possession, though Jang would be mortally wounded in the battle, giving Dirge a lifelong hatred for other Mandalorians. Dirge would serve the Sith during the end of the new Sith Wars, giving him plenty of Jedi killing experience, and went into hiding when the Sith were defeated, avoiding the Jedi and amassing immense wealth. About 100 years before the Clone Wars, though, he would be captured by the Mandalorians after successfully killing their leader, undergoing extreme torture that his body enabled him to survive, but was in unspeakable pain for many years. He eventually escaped and fully healed his body, though he was left almost completely insane. Unable to seek revenge against the nearly extinct Mandalorian warriors, he instead sought pleasure in hunting down the Jedi and their clone warriors, the latter of which were grown from a Mandalorian's genetic template. His debut appearance was actually before the Clone Wars show in issue 51 of the Republic comic series, where he's shown to have participated in the massacre of a settlement of Gungans. He would fight the Jedi repeatedly in the Republic comics, allied with the Separatists, until Anakin Skywalker finally killed Dirge by putting him in an escape pod and sending him flying towards a sun in the Obsession miniseries, which takes place right before Revenge of the Sith. In the new canon, Dirge's general Clone Wars history and anti-Jedi sentiment would be preserved, but he would actually survive the Clone Wars and live well into the Imperial era to ally and scuffle with the likes of Dr. Aphra and Baylor Valance in the 2020 Marvel comic series, presumably living on into the age of the New Republic. Dirge was originally going to appear in the 3D Clone Wars series, where Dave Filoni and Henry Gilroy originally envisioned the character being a human with fancy armor gadgets, as the animation budget wouldn't have allowed for Dirge's exotic alien physiology. George Lucas, however, suggested a bounty hunter that was inspired by old spaghetti westerns, which eventually led to the creation of the original character, Cad Bane. Barash Sylvain. In the first arc of the 2017 Darth Vader comic series, which is easily one of the best Star Wars comic series ever written, Vader tracks down and fights a Jedi named Karak Infillah in order to take his Kyber crystal and make a new Sith lightsaber. Master Infillah had initially escaped Order 66 because he was undergoing a Jedi tradition known as the Barash Vow, where a Jedi would undergo a self-imposed exile as penance for a perceived failure or trouble to interpret the Force after being involved in some kind of disaster or tragedy for which they felt responsible. The Barash Vow forbade communication with the Jedi Order, leaving the Jedi to atone and solely focus on attuning to the Force. This vow was named after Barash Sylvain, a Kagi Jedi Master who lived about 400 years before the events of the films. She grew up at the Jedi Temple with an unusually close sibling-like attachment to Porter Engle, a knobby-horned Ikrukian Jedi. The two solved conflicts together throughout the Outer Rim, with Sylvain using her intuition to sense others' intentions and Engle using his skill with a lightsaber. As seen in the High Republic comic miniseries The Blade by Charles Soule, who is also the writer of the Darth Vader series, Sylvain would fail to peacefully resolve a conflict on the planet Gansavor between the cities of Firevale and Bethune after being tricked by the heirs of the two cities. The Prince of Firevale and the Princess of Bethune told Sylvain that they were in love, but it was eventually revealed that they were secretly hoping to take the throne from the princess's mother. Before this, Sylvain ordered her brother Porter Engle to engage in the battle, which only escalated the conflict. Sylvain felt personally responsible for the death and destruction that followed, her greatest talent in the Force being unable to help her, and decided to take up a vow that for centuries afterwards would be taken by other Jedi in her name. Other than Master Infillah, the most prominent example of the Barash vow being named would be in The Acolyte, where Master Torben is stated to have taken the vow after his part in the disaster on Brendok, which precipitated the deaths of many witches and eventually many Jedi. Obi-Wan and Yoda's exiles during the reign of the Empire could also perhaps be understood to be Barash vows as well. Hor, better known as simply Hor, was a Tusken Raider who premiered as one of the playable characters in the fighting game Masters of Teräs Käsi. Hor is one of two original characters in the game and has the potential to battle against the likes of Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader. There's very little story to Masters of Teräs Käsi, and as such, very little backstory for Hor, at least until Abel G. Pena's online article, Barely Tolerable, Alien Henchmen of the Empire, Part 2. This collection of little stories includes Hor's backstory, and tells how the Tusken first crossed paths with Vader as Anakin Skywalker when the Jedi, enraged at his mother's death at the hands of Hor's hunting band, slew his entire village in 22 BBY, leaving Hor the only survivor. He would find Obi-Wan Kenobi's lightsaber in his desert home during Kenobi's exile, but would not take the weapon after experiencing a vision of a human with a horrifying black mask moving to strike him down, the same demon Outlander who slaughtered his family. Hor would eventually learn Teräs Käsi under Asherad Het, a Tusken-raised human and Jedi from the Republic comics who escaped Order 66. However, as shown in flashbacks from the Legacy comics, Het would be defeated by Kenobi, leaving him maskless and dishonored by the Tuskens, leaving Hor to search the galaxy for his mentor. Eventually finding Arden Lin, an ancient human recruiting warriors to assassinate high-profile rebels, Hor would join her on her quest after viewing a hologram of Luke Skywalker, recognizing in the young rebel's face the man who slew his family years prior. Eventually confronting Skywalker and defeating him in battle, Hor would experience another vision while holding his Gafferty to Luke's throat, ultimately deciding to spare Luke's life. Though Hor's ultimate fate is uncertain, many believe he continued to search for his old master Het or for the demon Outlander Vader, perhaps meeting his destiny to one or the other. Juhani. Juhani was a Cathar Jedi who can be recruited as a companion in Knights of the Old Republic. As of writing this, I'm actually about to start my first complete playthrough of Knights of the Old Republic for my second channel's Legends review series, so I don't actually want to spoil myself on too many of Juhani's relevant story details for this video, but there is one thing that makes Juhani especially notable. In short, she's essentially the first outright confirmed LGBTQ character in all of Star Wars. Knights of the Old Republic was made by BioWare, the studio behind other classic RPG series Baldur's Gate, which, similar to KOTOR, has a branching storyline with multiple options for romantic partners. Considering Baldur's Gate 2 came out in 2000, it's understandable that BioWare didn't include any same-sex romantic partner options in that game. Such things simply weren't done in the time in mainstream media. According to an article on Polygon written by BioWare project director David Gator, who happens to be a gay man, Gator was stunned when his fellow developers for KOTOR, most of whom were straight men, decided to include a lesbian romance option with Juhani. Gator wrote that he hoped that Juhani's romantic role in the game, which was planned to be reserved for only female player characters, would lead to wider acceptance of gay characters in video games and media as a whole, and expressed his frustration towards gamers who treat the smallest amount of representation or discussion of gay people as an insult or something that's being shoved down their throats. BioWare being allowed to include Juhani gave them the confidence and precedent to allow much more such representation in later games such as Dragon Age. All that being said, Juhani's romantic story option is a small part of a massive game, and most players of KOTOR likely have not engaged with it. The Juhani romance is only available to light side players who choose a female avatar, who has other romantic options such as Cartho Nasi, and you must regularly interact with Juhani throughout the game to unlock the needed dialogue trees. Also, because of KOTOR's nature as a branching story path game, other opportunities are open concerning interacting with Juhani, such as 2 chances to kill her and Juhani having the possibility to fall to the dark side. Interestingly, at one point, if the player decides to kill Juhani once she's fallen, another Jedi named Balea will turn to the dark side herself and try to avenge Juhani, strongly suggesting Juhani has had romantic pasts with other women as well. Even then, Juhani doesn't ever get as explicit as saying the word love, saying, depending on the player's past actions, that Juhani has come to care for the player, that she was not of as much value as she would have liked, and in the final conversation before confronting Darth Malak, if she is encouraged, Juhani will say that she has feelings for the player, and the player can say that she feels the same way. Juhani will say, though, that they need to deal with Darth Malak before they can do anything about their feelings. Despite all of this, rumors abounded, especially early after the game's release, that Juhani wasn't actually meant to be a same-sex romance option, and that the romance with her as a female player character was a bug. In fact, some players of the initial release version of the game reported being able to romance Juhani as a male player character, but story writer Peter Thomas confirmed in BioWare forums that the intention is for Juhani's romance to only be available to female players, and that the male romance option was the bug. Despite other rumors saying that Juhani was barely added to the game in time, or that the romance was toned down by higher-ups at BioWare or Lucasfilm, all official statements point to the contrary, with any toned downness likely being due to apprehension on the developer's part. With all that being said, I definitely think there's room here for more discussion on LGBTQ characters in Star Wars as a whole. Though Juhani is widely regarded as the first truly confirmed one, many Star Wars fans have speculated since the very first movie about queer-coded characters, most notably R2 and 3PO, 2 sexless but male-coded droids who bicker constantly and yet have an inseparable bond, kind of like an old married couple. Disney's media have been far more generous in their LGBT character representation, in expanded media at least, if not in the main movies. Though the first on-screen LGBTQ kiss in Star Wars was between 2 Glup Shittos, Resistance members Larma Dasi and Roby Tice. As Alex Jaff of Popverse writes, from the moment Luke Skywalker and Obi-Wan Kenobi entered that bustling cantina on Mos Eisley, Star Wars has presented us with limitless possibilities on the types of people and characters which can inhabit its galaxy. So I think it's not a huge stretch to say that queer representation in Star Wars and the Glup Shitto phenomenon that we all know and love are inextricably connected.
Let me do the talking, and whatever you do, don't stare.
At what?
Any of it.
Marfa-Lump. I don't think I need to tell you just how big the Phantom Menace's marketing push was. Star Wars has always been well known for being immensely, perhaps cynically so, interested in pushing products onto kid and adult fans, with R2-D2 beer coolers, Anakin Skywalker vending machines, and Jar Jar Tongue push pops being among the many consumable examples. But one iconic Star Wars character, which many of the past two videos commenters were surprised has not been mentioned yet, was created solely for the purpose of pushing Pepsi onto Star Wars buyers through special commercials. Say hello to Marfa-Lump, a lovable four-armed alien created by Industrial Light and Magic employee Danny Wagner, made exclusively for Pepsi commercials that aired around the time of Episode 1's release. Really, I don't think I can explain Marfa-Lump better than the Birth of Marfa-Lump documentary.
The power of the Marfa-Lump idea is it's one simple idea. It's not about Pepsi or Star Wars, it's about a character that loves both.
Star Wars and Pepsi have a very close association, and we wanted to create a character that can show the fun of Star Wars and the fun of drinking Pepsi all in one.
Lore-wise, the three commercials Marfa-Lump appeared in show that he lives with his adopted human family in Iowa with his immense Star Wars collection, has difficulty with romance due to his obsession with reenacting scenes from Episode 1 with soda cans, and operates a modified taxi cab outfitted with pod racer engines. There's this one commercial where he says he's going to be late to go see the Phantom Menace, so he launches off in his spaceship, loops around the moon, and then crash lands in a theater in California, causing immense property damage. I don't exactly get paid enough from these videos to try and make sense of just how insane and unhinged Marfa-Lump actually is. There's only about 1.5 minutes of Marfa-Lump content out there, stretched between 3 commercials, not counting the making of documentary, and by all accounts I can find, it seems that this accounts for virtually all of Marfa-Lump's appearances. A physical sculpture of him once used as a stand-in for the commercials can still be viewed at Lucasfilm headquarters near their consumer products department, though a much larger 4-foot-tall version apparently looms somewhere in a dark corner near the company mailroom. Designer Danny Wagner's other contributions to Star Wars include the Grand Pod Racer Mahonic, which Wagner actually got to play physically as a brief part in The Phantom Menace. The Marfa-Lump commercials, which at the end of which Mahonic screams "crazy alien" at Marfa-Lump, is also one of Mahonic's only other few appearances, for all of you Mahonic heads out there who needed some more information on him. Clone that punched a droid. During the Battle of Christophsis, as depicted in the Star Wars The Clone Wars movie, a clone trooper of the 501st Legion can be seen rushing up to a Separatist B-1 battle droid and punching it, causing the trooper to recoil and hold his wrist in pain before being shot dead at point-blank range. This trooper doesn't exactly have much of a presence outside of this single scene, being killed in the first ever piece of media for the Clone Wars series. As far as I can tell, this trooper doesn't even have a Wikipedia page. Despite this lack of further information, the character has developed quite the cult following among those who remember and respect the trooper for his desperate yet audacious battle strategy. Other clones, many of which appear in the background of other Clone Wars episodes and a couple from the movies, have been noted as similarly punching droids, albeit with more effective results. Stormtrooper that hit his head. Even more famous than the droid-punching trooper is another unlucky trooper, this time an Imperial Stormtrooper, that can be seen hitting his head on a door in A New Hope. This Stormtrooper bumping his head is one of the most legendary background details slash funny trivia moments slash gaffes from the original film, and due to the character's infamy, George Lucas actually added in a sound effect to the scene for the special editions to draw attention to it. If you're from my generation and mostly grew up with the special edition, it's hard to imagine this trooper not making a noticeable donk sound when walking into the door.
Take over. See to him.
The identity of the actor who played this trooper is actually a bit of a mystery. Extras Laurie Good, Michael Leader, and Martin Reed have all claimed to be the trooper that bumped his head or recall a similar story from being on set, so it's difficult to discern who exactly is the true head bumper. I feel inclined to prop this up alongside the mystery of the identities of the subjects of the VJ Day in Times Square photograph, a mystery I feel is of similar nature and importance. For a really long time though, there was virtually nothing else notable surrounding the character in or out of universe. The original scene is the character's only appearance in the Legends continuity, with no book or comic being released that explains just why this trooper bumped his head when he did, which I know that Star Wars fans were dying to have a deep and lore-based explanation for. George Lucas himself, though, may have the answer that fans have sought. In Episode 2, one can see in the distance of one shot Jango Fett bumping his head on the door of his ship, Slave One, on Kamino, and in the DVD commentary for the film, George Lucas suggested that Jango Fett passed down his head-bumping trait to his clones. This seems to contradict the lore concerning Imperial Stormtroopers though, as by the time of A New Hope, most or all of the Jango Fett clones were phased out for conscripted soldiers in either continuity. For those big head-denting trooper fans out there though, the new canon has given us a much clearer idea of just who this guy is and what happened to him after the events of the film. The From a Certain Point of View series of short story collections, which I have already referenced numerous times in this and previous videos, were written by a wide assortment of authors who were basically given free rein to write stories about whichever major or minor character from the original trilogy that they chose. Our favorite head-hitting trooper was actually the subject of a story in the first volume, Bump, written by the two writers Ben Acker and Ben Blacker. No, I did not make that up. Bump is less than 10 pages long, but lets us know a few crucial details about this trooper. He originally grew up on the dangerous world of Parsh, where the Empire put his people to work in mines. After reporting one of his elders to the Empire for trying to spark an uprising, he was allowed into the Empire's ranks, was designated TD-110, and was stationed on Tatooine. According to the story, this trooper was also actually the trooper that Obi-Wan Kenobi mind-tricked to let them pass through Mos Eisley, essentially combining two iconic stormtroopers that messed up on the job into one. This mind trick ended up giving this trooper a splitting headache, and after being reassigned to the Death Star, realized that those were the droids that they were looking for, then soon after hit his head on the door to the docking bay control room while on the way to investigate the rebels with his squad mates. When he recovers and sees R2 and 3PO escaping, he tries to shoot at them but is told off by a Moff, who ultimately disciplines him by sending him away from the Death Star. For many, this would be a satisfying end for this character's story. Not only does it connect two very iconic stormtroopers together, but it also confirms that the trooper survived the destruction of the Death Star. However, Benz, Acker, and Blacker actually didn't decide to end TD-110's story there. On the same day that the Certain Point of View collection was released, the two authors released another Star Wars project, an entry into the Junior Readers Join the Resistance series titled Escape from Vodran. In this story, the trooper is identified by his given first name of Wanton and ends up serving as a commander for the First Order on the world of Vodran. However, he would get killed by the protagonists of the book, J Squadron, after they rammed a light shuttle into his ship. Unfortunately, I was unable to obtain a copy of Escape from Vodran in time for the writing of this video, so I don't actually know from the book itself how Wanton is identified as the head-bumping trooper. Maybe he has some internal monologue about remembering the head bump while on his way to attack some Resistance child soldiers or something. I don't know if anyone who owns a copy of this book knows any more details about that. Maybe let me know in a comment if you do. Ama-Gun Di. Jedi Master Ama-Gun Di was a Nikto Jedi who served during the Battle of Ryloth of the Clone Wars, fighting to free its population from the Separatists. In his first and last direct appearance in the show, he died while making a considerable last stand with clone Captain Keeley against Separatist battle droids. Ama-Gun Di is famous for little more than dying nobly, which is reflected in his name, which sounds like someone saying, "I'm gonna die." This connection was confirmed as intentional by the online guide for the episode supply lines on the Star Wars website. It is possible, though, that Master Di is survived by at least a couple of relatives of considerably lower moral standing. The Nikto character Moduelo Di appears in a roster of prisoners seen in the Season 2 Mandalorian episode The Tragedy, and the crime lord Rin Riven Di appears in the novel Bloodline. Jedi Master Bates. Another Jedi with a, comical name is Jedi Master Soon Bates, though thankfully Master Bates' name does not reflect his behavior nor the outcomes of his battles. He would serve the Jedi Order during the Yinchori Uprising in 33 BBY, as shown in the Jedi Council Acts of War Legends comic miniseries, defending Coruscant and advising Yoda during the conflict as a knight. He would next be seen in the Obsession comic series, which takes place shortly before Revenge of the Sith at the very end of the Clone Wars. Now sporting a blue-colored lightsaber as opposed to the orange one featured in Acts of War, Master Bates accompanied Bail Organa, Obi-Wan Kenobi, and other Jedi to Boz Pity for a mission where they met fierce Separatist opposition. Despite this, Bates would bravely storm a Separatist base at the behest of Senator Organa, where he would meet a swift and violent end at the hands of General Grievous. Though Bates is a pretty minor character in both of the comic series he appears in, he is of course well remembered for his name. This notable name came about when the character was first created by comic writer Randy Stradley, who wanted to play a practical joke on comic editor Sue Rostoni, who had a habit of placing the word master in front of any Jedi's name, regardless of their rank. Rostoni wasn't the only one who ended up editing that series though, so Jedi Soon Bates made it all the way through to the published series, though he was initially just a knight, making the pun incomplete. Hayden Blackman, a writer for Obsession, would utilize the character and make him a master to fully realize the joke. After Master Bates' death in Obsession though, he's remained an otherwise quite obscure character with virtually no other appearances or mentions. Roger. R0GR, better known as Roger, is a B1 battle droid that served the Freemaker family in the LEGO series The Freemaker Adventures. To completely level with you, I have not really watched much of the Freemaker Adventures where Roger is an important character, but his presence there isn't exactly what I'm interested in for this video. This Iceberg series is mostly about weird continuity and behind the scenes facts, so I think the most interesting part of Roger is that he is actually technically a canon character in Disney's main continuity, which I believe is the first instance that a character that originated in a non-canon LEGO special made its way over into the official continuity as opposed to the other way around. Through Roger's appearance in the canon reference book Star Wars Droidography, in which Roger is the in-universe author, he has become officially canon and even draws in other elements of the LEGO show such as the Freemaker family and Jek 14 into the official canon, a bit of which I covered in the last video. Though it's probably worth mentioning that other than Roger's other appearances in some other minor reference materials, not much of the Freemaker or LEGO continuity has made its way into the official timeline, with Matt Martin of Lucasfilm confirming that a version of the Freemakers probably do exist in canon, but that the entire show isn't necessarily canon. This makes sense, as though the show isn't outright parodic like many LEGO Star Wars shows before it, it does take some big swings with Star Wars lore, such as rewriting the history of the Jedi to feature an ancient legendary artifact known as the Kyber Saber, built by a splinter order of Force Builder Jedi. The show did incorporate a lot of movie characters and extended canon characters from sources such as Rebels, so the very broad strokes of the show and the Freemaker family can probably fit in the Star Wars timeline. After all though, Star Wars shouldn't really be about strict continuity rules or what's official or not all the time, so if you enjoyed the Freemaker Adventures, then it's as canon as you want it to be. For now though, it seems that for some reason, Roger has been given full clearance to be a canon character, receiving much more focus than any other LEGO original character, even appearing in LEGO Star Wars The Skywalker Saga when all other Freemaker characters are absent from that game. Bistan. Bistan was a corporal in the Rebel Alliance that served in the Battle of Scarif, featured in Rogue One. The premier member of the Iakaru species, Bistan is a short, hairy, pink-skinned guy who shrieks like a monkey while manning the gunner's position on a Rebel U-Wing ship, and that's about the only reason I included him in this video. I think he's hilarious, though he's probably overshadowed a bit by Pow, who gets both more screen time and decibels. According to reference material such as Bistan's databank entry in the Rogue One visual guide, Bistan was called a space monkey in-universe by his compatriots and was regarded as crazy by Ruscott Melshi, who also admitted that he wouldn't want anyone else covering him in battle. Though he served in the Alliance to help free his people from the Empire, ultimately he truly fought simply for the thrill of combat. He also didn't use any safety restraints on his gunner position, just hanging on for dear life to stay aboard during battle. He was portrayed in Rogue One by performer Nick Kellington, who was also the creature performer for Claude in The Rise of Skywalker. In the film, Bistan's eyes are actually Nick's eyes, albeit with contacts I'm assuming, as Nick Kellington's eyes do not appear to normally be a sickly orange color. This approach made Bistan appear more lifelike and was inspired by Chewbacca's visible eyes as used in the other movies. Doom. Doom was the chosen name of a clone commander who fought in the Clone Wars alongside Mickey and twin Jedi generals Tip Lee and Tip Lar. Doom was prevalent during the Battle of Ringo Vinda, where Tip Lee and Tip Lar teamed up with Anakin Skywalker and the 501st Legion to free the space station from Admiral Trench's separatist droid forces. This battle, featured in the Clone Wars episode The Unknown, would kick off one of the most interesting and emotional arcs of the show after Tup of the 501st shoots down General Tip Lar, causing fellow Clone 5s to begin investigating the mysteries of the clone inhibitor chips and Order 66. Doom is a very minor part of this overarching plot and isn't even named in the show, receiving his name instead from the episode's online guide. Doom's name and intricate green and yellow armor design are inspired by villain Dr. Doom from the Marvel Comics. This is far from the only overt reference to non-Star Wars media in Star Wars, especially from a project helmed by Dave Filoni. For example, the gauntlets worn by Din Djarin in The Mandalorian feature blue arrows, which are a deliberate nod to the markings on Aang from Avatar: The Last Airbender, which Dave Filoni contributed to by directing multiple episodes and working as a storyboard artist. Glitch and Ding. Many, like me, who grew up with Clone Wars era content have long wondered what it would be like if a clone trooper were to be able to wield the Force and receive Jedi training, marrying two of the most iconic factions of warriors in Star Wars. Though the LEGO specials gave us something like that in the form of Jek 14, there are a couple of clone characters that fit the bill and are more reflective of the general clone population. The closest we've perhaps gotten to any true canonical example of a Jango Fett clone aspiring to be trained in the Force is Glitch from the 2013 Clone Wars Defenders of the Lost Temple Legends graphic novel. Glitch long believed himself to have a sensitivity to the Force, which caused him to be mocked by many of his fellow clones. On a mission to the planet Dre 2 to recover an ancient Sith artifact, Glitch would imagine he was using the Force to navigate the temple and would ask his Jedi escort Renax Omani if it were possible for a clone to use the Force, though their conversation would be interrupted by the Mandalorian Death Watch before he could get an answer. Glitch would recover his master's lightsaber to duel Pre Vizsla during the attack, and would cause the temple's collapse in order to save his friends and drive back the Mandalorians. While his comrades believed Glitch to be dead, Glitch actually survived the collapse, protected by the Gauntlet of Crush the Younger, the very artifact that they were sent to retrieve. So, while not a clone that received any true formal training, the story of Glitch proves that some Star Wars stories have contemplated the idea, and this is far from the first example to show a clone exhibiting Jedi-like bravery. A far less substantial but perhaps more well-known example is Ding, who similarly wielded a lightsaber at one point. Ding appeared briefly in issue 2 of the 2017 Darth Vader comic series, where shortly after Order 66, Ding and the other clones in his contingent were assigned to the Brightholme space station to catalog Jedi artifacts. Ding picked up the saber and claimed to be one of the bygone warriors. Not long after, Ding would be killed by Darth Vader on his own agenda to find records of surviving Jedi, and would wield the greed-bladed lightsaber claimed by Ding in order to strike down the clones. Zero MR1. Zero MR1 was a protocol droid aligned with the First Order who would end up contributing to galactic history through an adventure he had with C-3PO. As chronicled in the Star Wars special C-3PO one-shot comic and the LEGO Star Wars The Force Awakens DLC level The Phantom Limb, Zero MR1, or Omri, crash-landed on the planet Tal, where he was captured by resistance droids led by C-3PO, who were trying to find and rescue Admiral Akbar from interrogation and execution by the First Order. The droid group suffered heavy casualties due to Tal's oppressive environment, being assaulted by spice spiders and a giant tentacled Thydax, with the latter of which ripped off C-3PO's left arm. With 3PO and Omri the only survivors, they contemplated their long lives and nature as droids, with 3PO reliving pieces of memories long since wiped from his memory banks. Eventually, Omri decides to sacrifice himself for C-3PO, walking through acid rain to activate a beacon so that 3PO may be rescued, and as the droid melts, only leaves behind his red arm. When Poe Dameron rescues 3PO, 3PO decides that he would use Omri's arm as a replacement in order to honor the other droid's sacrifice. As you can probably tell, this story, and by extension the droid Omri himself, primarily exists to explain why C-3PO has a red arm in The Force Awakens, a fact which has been thoroughly memed on throughout the years, and is also cynically believed by many to be an artistic decision solely driven by the desire to sell more toys. Apparently, the story's title is not a reference to The Phantom Menace, but instead Hideo Kojima's 2015 video game Metal Gear Solid 5: The Phantom Pain, which features the protagonist Venom Snake using a red prosthetic arm. Both of the game and The Force Awakens came out in 2015, and Kojima and J.J. Abrams are friends in real life, so it's very possible that one was meant to be a reference to the other. As another nod to Kojima in The Force Awakens, the Night Watcher worm that watches BB-8 roll into the Jakku Night at the beginning of the film makes a noise that sounds like Kojima. A Star Wars Kids YouTube video covering languages in Star Wars even calls the language spoken by Night Watcher worms Hideo. Omri is voiced in the LEGO Force Awakens game by Simon Pegg, who also voiced Unkar Plutt in the Force Awakens film. Jedi Survivor music artists. Star Wars Jedi Survivor, arguably one of the best Star Wars video games ever made, and definitely one of the best things to come out of the Disney era, features a huge open world of Kobo with a small central hub, Pyloon Saloon, that the player returns to throughout the game and can be upgraded in various small ways. One of the key features of the saloon is the music, which can be purchased in-game and played in the saloon by the droid DDEC. This music, compiled in the album Sounds from the Galactic Skylanes, features music from a handful of real-world bands that collaborated with the game's music team to create a wide range of songs that feel very authentically Star Wars. Due to the limits imposed on the game's production due to COVID-19, all of this music collaboration between music director Nick Leviers and the collaborating artists and bands was actually done through Zoom meetings and emails, and though the musicians were all given a Star Wars music style guide, they were primarily encouraged to bring all of their own sounds to the table, which can definitely be noticed in the game, though the Respawn team did slightly tweak the music to really pull together the Star Warsy feel. Mongolian folk metal band The Who features in the game with 3 songs after having already made the iconic Shugan Ishana track for Fallen Order and completed their other songs, Ishirin Vashahina, Ho Ho Chu, and Iran Shihana as early as early 2020. Each of the bands in Survivor's soundtrack is represented by a new in-universe name, with The Who being known as the Agassar. These songs, like Shugan Ishana and Fallen Order, were first written in Mongolian, then translated into a new Star Wars language that the band created themselves, and feature Mongolian instruments such as the horsehead fiddle and jaw harp, as well as traditional Mongolian throat singing. After that came experimental jazz, avant-garde, Tel Aviv-based band Tatran, known in the game as Nar Tat, with 3 A's each, who contributed Spiceman, Ground Pulse, and Fields of Dusk, the orchestral version of the latter being a personal favorite of mine and one of the most beautiful tracks in the game. Their tracks are something close to a combination of rock and trap, something a little bit more urban, and definitely wouldn't sound out of place in the Khorasan underground. Next, the team hired Turkish group Altan Gun, who represented themselves fittingly in the game with the name Altan Laser Blaster, who also contributed a new alien language for their rapping lyrics to go along with their already distinct and alien blend of music styles. Their tracks were High Waves, Short Pause Dance, and Rumble Droid, and all feature very fun, bouncy beats and electronic noises whose sounds resemble string instruments, or maybe they are string instruments, I don't know. I know very little about music, if you couldn't tell. Kalen Ellis, who is known as Mr. Mockwell in the game, contributed some more relaxed instrumental tracks such as Revisit Waters, Zanara, and a Sublime Raid 2, which resembled perhaps modern lo-fi songs. Last but not least is Joy Wave, wonderfully rendered in the game as Yubnib Zek and the main characters, whose songs have more of a pop feel. Their tracks, Ebon Flow, Who Mourns for Terrace, and Meet Me at the Sabacc Table are definitely close to the top of my list of my favorite of all of the Jedi Survivor songs, and the first two at least seem to be references to Knights of the Old Republic. The lead singer sounds distinctly like an Ewok in both pitch and language, which with a name like Yubnib Zek, it wouldn't surprise me if the character was an Ewok. Though how an Ewok got off Endor before the rebellion to become a galaxy-wide pop sensation is beyond me. Bana Brimu. Bana Brimu was a senator representing Humbarine in the Galactic Senate in the period just before the formation of the Empire. She can be seen in Revenge of the Sith, albeit only in deleted scenes, where she joined the delegation of 2000 with Mon Mothma and Bail Organa to oppose Chancellor Palpatine's continued exploitation of emergency wartime powers. Brimu was portrayed in these scenes by Chinese-American actress Bai Ling, who is largely known for her roles in Chinese dramas, thrillers, and action films, but has also appeared in American productions such as The Crow. When her scenes were cut from the final film, she infamously claimed that this was due to her appearing as a nude centerfold model in the May 2005 issue of Playboy, which lined up with Revenge of the Sith's release date and heavily advertised Ling's role in the film. George Lucas disputed this, however, stating that the scenes featuring the delegation of 2000 were cut over a year prior. These scenes also featured Genevieve O'Reilly's only scenes in the film as a young Mon Mothma, but she would go on to reprise her role in Rogue One and Andor to much acclaim. Other than these deleted scenes, Bana Brimu has seen scarce mentions in other story media, appearing only in the Legends Episode 3 prequel novel Labyrinth of Evil, and more recently in Reign of the Empire, Mask of Fear.
Well, if there's a bright center to the universe, you're on the planet that it's farthest from.
Palpatine's advisors. I'm certain that a really good chunk of you watching or listening, as kids when watching Return of the Jedi, have wondered just who the hell these guys are in their funny hats and robes that hang out with Palpatine and Vader for like 2 scenes. These are known as the Emperor's Advisors or Imperial Advisors, and they were basically Palpatine's closest confidants other than Darth Vader, and most or all of them probably knew about Palpatine's status as a Sith Lord. Of the ones that appear in Episode 6, who are known as the Inner Circle group, we have Kren Blista Vinay, Ars Dangor, Sim Alu, Janus Grijatis, Pebimaris Zorn, and Sate Pestage. All of them have shown up briefly in a number of other canon and legend sources, but individually, few of these characters have much that is especially interesting about them. Most of these characters were not even positively assigned their names until the release of certain sources from the new canon, such as the Kernels and Husks story from a Certain Point of View Return of the Jedi collection. While names such as Ars Dangor and Pebimaris Zorn existed in legends, for a long time they simply existed as names that were listed as names of the advisors, but never linked to certain ones individually. This is a fairly rare and strange distinction, especially for characters who appear on screen in an original original trilogy film. Many of these advisors came within Palpatine's inner circle during his rise to power as Chancellor, and before he even declared himself Emperor, with some of them helping gather Sith artifacts through the different stages of his rule. Other characters, also known as some of Palpatine's close advisors, do exist in extended media, but many of these characters appear in like half a dozen RPG scenarios from the 80s and 90s, which I'm sure there are lots of people out there that find that interesting, but that's kind of scraping the bottom of the barrel as far as I'm concerned for this video. The 6 we see in Return of the Jedi, however, did die aboard the second Death Star in both canon and Legends, that is, except for Saint Pestage, who, like some of the best Star Wars characters, has exceptionally bizarre and convoluted circumstances regarding his death. In Legends, Pestage was killed in the Rogue Squadron comics, which contradicted earlier reference material that stated he had survived at least until the events of Dark Empire 5 years later. An article in Star Wars Game Magazine resolved this by saying that the Pestage killed in Rogue Squadron was actually an insane clone, an excuse that seems to occur somewhat often in EU material from this time, as well as in comic books in general. Afterwards, though, future sources could never seem to agree on which Pestage was the clone, as well as other minor details, such as when the character was removed from power and when he moved to the Emperor's secret world of Biss. Another advisor, though not among the 6 we see in Episode 6, is Yukta Shu, who is exclusive to the new canon and came close to significantly altering the future of the galaxy in the year after the Battle of Endor. After escaping capture from the New Republic and joining up with the Acolytes of the Beyond, he attempted to save the Empire according to his own zealous beliefs of the dark side, recovering a number of powerful Sith artifacts and bringing them to Jakku, where they would be thrown down into the planet's core by Gallius Rax, who was trying to execute Palpatine's more official contingency plan by destroying Jakku and all of the Imperial and New Republic forces that were battling over its surface. The immense power of the artifacts nearly caused a chain reaction that destroyed the planet, but Sloane managed to plug up the hole, causing the Battle of Jakku and then the continued history of the galaxy to proceed towards the state we can see in the sequel trilogy. Roran Karab. Roran Karab, continuing the legendary tradition of many Jedi such as Coleman Trebor and Amagun Dai, is an Ithorian Jedi basically only known for dying. Karab was part of the task force that bravely protected, or attempted to protect, Chancellor Palpatine from General Grievous during the Separatist invasion of Coruscant. Though he technically first appeared in the Labyrinth of Evil novel, he's most commonly known for putting up a damn good fight against Grievous in chapters 24 and 25 of the 2D Clone Wars micro-series, which cover the same events. I mostly remember him because he was in this really cool lightsaber guide reference book I got at the Scholastic Book Fair once, and I thought that an Ithorian Jedi was super cool and was disappointed that I couldn't spot him in any of the movies. Roran Karab is named after Ron Cobb, the concept artist who originally designed the Ithorian species for A New Hope. Halagad Ventor. Halagad Ventor, by all accounts, was at first destined to be a pretty inconsequential and obscure Jedi character. First introduced in the Domain of Evil adventure supplement for the West End Star Wars role-playing game in 1991, the character served as a dark Jedi antagonist to the players of the scenario, where ultimate victory can only be achieved by redeeming Ventor and bringing him back to the light side. He was originally identified in the RPG book as having served under Obi-Wan Kenobi during the Clone Wars, as well as being basically the character who betrayed the Jedi during the rise of the Empire, I suppose apparently alongside Vader. But as the years passed and the prequel trilogy filled in the lore surrounding the Great Jedi Purge, Ventor became one of many insignificant loose ends from the expanded universe that didn't exactly fit with the newer details concerning the prequel era. The character was revived in a 2002 HoloNet news article on the Star Wars website written by Pablo Hidalgo and Paul Enns, and told that Ventor went missing and was assumed dead while trying to secure peace talks concerning a planet's civil war. Another HoloNet article released 3 years later showed a physical depiction of a younger Halagad Ventor. This portrait was modeled directly off of a picture of Abel G. Pena, who you may know from the previous videos as a very prolific author of obscure Star Wars lore and inventor of many retcons for bizarre and obscure expanded universe lore discrepancies. In fact, Pena had an interest in the character for years previously, using the character's name as his username across the internet, and wrote about the character in the following few years in RPG supplements. In a bit of a detour, let's talk about Star Wars Annual Number 1, a standalone issue of the original Star Wars Marvel comic series. This adventure sees Luke and Leia help defend the Sakai Tree race against the Empire, and after they succeed, Lord Arg tells Luke that during the Clone Wars, Obi-Wan Kenobi and 2 of his Jedi students also saved their world of Sky, identifying one as Darth Vader and the other as the one that held the weapon that Luke then used. Of course, this was back when Vader and Luke's father were considered separate characters, but while the inconsistencies in the original trilogy movies could be smoothed over with, from a certain point of view, Naboo, the inconsistency in this comic is a bit more clear that Luke's father and Darth Vader were two separate people. Pena had long wanted to correct this error and wanted to use Ventor to do so, ultimately getting his chance by including such an explanation in his online RPG supplement, Aliens in the Empire. Pena would expand on this story, writing a full novella called Skywalkers, which was put on hold for several years but finally released in 2015 as one of the last pieces of Legends media under the collection titled The Other Lost Missions, Rare Clone Wars Comics and Literature on the Star Wars website. The lightsaber discrepancy was solved by showing that Anakin and Ventor were participating in the Concordance of Fealty, a Jedi tradition that was essentially created to solve similar continuity issues. The Concordance of Fealty involves two Jedi swapping their lightsabers in order to symbolize the trust between two Jedi and to better understand the nature of their weapons and their relationship to the Force. This retcon was first used to explain why Mace Windu's lightsaber hilt and blade color in The Phantom Menace and related media differed from his signature purple lightsaber that he first wielded in Attack of the Clones. George R. Binks. George R. Binks was the father of infamous Gungan Jar Jar Binks. Though Jar Jar's parentage has been scarcely mentioned in Star Wars media, with his old databank entry on the Star Wars website indicating that he was an orphan by the time of The Phantom Menace, the 10-page comic story from Star Wars Tales number 20 titled George R. Binks tells us a story of Jar Jar's father and the terrible woe he experienced in having to live with his son. Going back centuries, the Binks family on Naboo held a whaling company named Binks & Son, and by the time of 43 BBY, the company had passed on to George R. and his son Jar Jar. During a whaling expedition that nearly proved successful, George's heroic attempts to hunt a whale and escape unscathed were thwarted time and time again by his 9-year-old son's clumsy antics. After becoming stranded with his wife and son, George begins to lose hope, reflecting on how hard he's tried to teach Jar Jar the skills of his family that had been passed on for generations, but that such was impossible because Jar Jar is an imbecile. After attempting to shoot himself in the head to escape his misery, George reminisces on the woman he truly wanted to marry, the warrior Gungan Sheebla, who he did not wed because she could not bear him a child, as he believed that having an heir was more important than love. He continues to find his son continually harassed by sea creatures due to his stupidity. Bleeding from the scalp and with no hope for escape, George can do nothing but hang his head in shame. As mentioned before, this is technically the only story that has given any details about George R. Binks, and though it holds an uncertain continuity status even within Legends as a part of the Star Wars Tales series, it doesn't really contradict anything else. The obscure series of junior RPG scenario books, Episode 1 Adventures, also has Boss Nass mention that Jar Jar is only tolerated in Gungan society because of the respect held for his mother and father. The idea that Jar Jar had a respected lineage that was ultimately tarnished solely by his own unique sheer stupidity makes Jar Jar's role in the overall saga that just much funnier and more tragic. Snoke's Attendants. The mysterious Attendants were members of an ancient insectoid species native to the unknown regions. Recruited by many factions throughout history, they most notably can be seen in the employ of Supreme Leader Snoke in the background of his throne room in The Last Jedi, but also at times were allied with the Grisk hegemony as mentioned in the Thrawn Ascendancy trilogy. They are credited with charting the hyperspace trails necessary for the remnants of the Empire to escape the known galaxy and reform the First Order following the Battle of Jakku. They did not communicate like other beings, as they were mute and instead sent pulses of energy to each other that were not visible to humans. The Attendants originated from designs done by concept artist Ivan Manzella for The Force Awakens and were almost used in that film and in Rogue One, but they were difficult to find a place for, ultimately landing in Snoke's throne room in Episode 8. Darth Revan. Darth Revan was one of the most legendary figures in the history of the galaxy. Once a revered Jedi Master who led a renegade faction of Jedi known as the Revanshists against the Mandalorians during the Mandalorian Wars, he would eventually rediscover the Sith Empire and turn to the... Oh, wait, this isn't about Darth Revan, this is about Darth Revan. You're telling me these two are actually two totally different characters, and that this bit wasn't funny the last time I did it either? Damn.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
Well, Darth Revan was a Sith Lord of the Zelosian species who was alive and active during the New Sith Wars around 1000 BBY. Surprisingly, though Darth Revan is far less well known than the similarly named Darth Revan, Revan actually was introduced as a character first, with his first mention being on the Wizards of the Coast website for an RPG supplement article published 3 months before the release of the Knights of the Old Republic game in 2003. Revan was never really featured in any story content though, and was only ever really explored explored in other RPG supplements and scenarios, with his main deal being that he made a fortress on the planet of Almas and was looking for the path to immortality, as many other Sith have been known to do. He also apparently summoned a powerful Force storm that was strong enough to sweep himself forward into the future to arrive at an important battle between the Jedi and the Sith, where he would be killed quite easily. Really, the only reason this guy is worth mentioning, other than if you're really into obscure RPG and Sith lore, is that he has a confusingly similar name to the far more well-known Darth Revan. Though this would eventually be retconned to be far less coincidental in universe, as in the reference book Jedi vs. Sith, The Essential Guide to the Force, Ryder Wyndham would retcon Darth Revan's name as being based on an inaccurate Sith manuscript that discussed Darth Revan. Saucerhead. The being simply known as Saucerhead was a member of an unknown dust-breathing species and was employed as a sabacc dealer on Vandor during the Imperial era, as seen in Solo, a Star Wars story, where he deals for the first sabacc game played between Lando Calrissian and Han Solo, speaking his unique language of Cynogan. Like many a great background alien before him, he received a name through merchandising based on his appearance, and like many of the Solo movies' characters, his first name was revealed in a Topps trading card. The character was played by sleight-of-hand magician Stephen Bridges, who initially only worked on the movie as a consultant for the card dealing in the game for Donald Glover, but eventually decided that for the card dealer character, it would be easier to just put Stephen in a costume and have him do the cards himself instead of training somebody else to do it. He discusses the details of his involvement with the film in a video on his YouTube channel, where he explains that he couldn't reveal anything about his involvement before his friend, who worked on the creature effects team, said his name publicly in an interview. He also explained how the costume was heavy and claustrophobic and difficult to wear for more than 10 minutes. Jad Bean. Jad Bean is the name of an Imperial Navy operator who was stationed aboard the Death Star II, as seen in Return of the Jedi, where he has only one line of dialogue in the final film when talking to Moff Jerjerrod. Interestingly, he had many more interactions with Jerjerrod in deleted scenes, one of which shows Jerjerrod reluctantly giving the order to destroy Endor to stop the rebel attack. Jad Bean was portrayed in the film, though uncredited, by actor Stuart Fox, but the character's notable name comes from a real man named Jad Bean. Jad Bean, the character, was first given this name in the 2013's Legends reference book Death Star Owner's Technical Manual, written by prolific Star Wars author Ryder Wyndham, who had previously contributed writing to various Dark Horse Star Wars comics. He included the name Jad Bean as a reference to his real-life friend, Jad Bean, who founded the Star Wars Micro Machines Facebook page. Most people tuckerize or otherwise distort names when someone names a Star Wars character after themselves or someone else, but I suppose that Jad Bean just happened to have a name that already fit perfectly as a Star Wars character. Though Jad Bean doesn't have many additional details from Legends sources, the new canon has seen an unexpected return of the character. An unrelated character named Scorch, with the callsign Zeta Leader, was first featured in a First Order TIE Fighter expansion for the X-Wing Miniatures tabletop game in December 2015, and would continue to be featured in additional First Order-themed expansions. In 2019, with the release of another reference book, the TIE Fighter Owner's Workshop Manual, Ryder Wyndham once again paid tribute to his friend Bean by linking the Jad Bean character with Zeta Leader, or Scorch, from the Miniatures game, confirming Jad Bean's survival after the Battle of Endor and continued service to the Empire through its successor state. Bean would then be included as an unlockable First Order character in the 2020 mobile game Star Wars Starfighter Missions, giving him an updated character portrait for the First Order era.
I have been every voice
You have ever heard.
inside your head.
Tor Valum. Tor Valum was an ancient Dark Lord of the Sith who was the master of Darth Plagueis and the one to teach Plagueis the secret to immortality through the dark side of the Force. Darth Sidious was aware of Tor Valum and recorded a holocron message to his apprentice Darth Vader in the event that Vader's son Luke Skywalker would turn to the dark side and strike him down, so that Vader could take Skywalker to the lost world of Remnicor to train Luke in the dark side under Valum. Though Vader would turn back to the light and kill Palpatine instead, 3 decades later, Vader's grandson Kylo Ren would travel to Remnicor and learn from Valum how to drain the living force from another living being, a power which Ren would then use to kill Valum. All of that probably sounds like a bunch of nonsense that never happened and doesn't line up with any continuity, canon, or Legends, and that's because Tor Valum is an original character created by Colin Trevorrow for the unproduced script for Episode 9 titled Duel of the Fates. Not much is known about the production of Colin Trevorrow's plans for the film outside of the script that was leaked in 2020, but Valum's potential appearance, just like much of the elements of Duel Duel of the Fates would have recontextualized much of the Star Wars saga. First off, and what may be the most immediately obvious tidbit, is that Tor Valum would have replaced Darth Tenebrous as Darth Plagueis' master. Though Tenebrous is a Legends character that hadn't yet been introduced in canon, that alone isn't a huge deal, but the idea that Plagueis' master was still alive while Palpatine was around kind of contradicts the rule of two, though I can't say that that hasn't been stomped on time and time again by Palpatine and his own apprentices. These Iceberg videos are not about my own opinions on the franchise, but if I were to dip my toe into the Duel of the Fates story for a bit, I honestly think it doesn't make a whole lot of sense that Palpatine would have a contingency plan for his death that involved Vader and Luke continuing the Sith legacy. I feel like it's pretty clear in Return of the Jedi that Palpatine is goading Luke to kill him not because he actually wants Luke to kill him, but so that Luke will give in to his anger, especially considering when Luke does get angry enough to kill him, Vader defends him. Plus, if we add in the context from The Rise of Skywalker, or maybe even Dark Empire from Legends, it's also possible that Palpatine would have liked to transfer his spirit into Luke or another clone with the Sith ritual, which also makes sense. Also, the idea that this ancient, uber-powerful Sith master was just stranded chilling on a planet doing nothing but waiting around doesn't make a ton of sense to me. At least Palpatine had a plan and told everybody in the galaxy on Fortnite when he was finally ready to roll out of bed. But maybe you can all debate that further in the comments. I honestly feel like I've mulled over and argued about the merits and flaws of The Rise of Skywalker on my own enough for about 10 lifetimes. I also feel like it might be worth noting that Jedi Fallen Order features a lost ancient race of force-wielding sages called the Zepho, who bear a reasonable physical resemblance to Tor Valum, as seen in the concept art for Duel of the Fates. Considering both Episode 9 and Fallen Order were released in 2019 and were developed much around the same time, perhaps there were plans early on to link Tor Valum to the lore of the game somehow. Bedlam Spirits. The original 1977 Marvel Star Wars comic series was one of the biggest sources of early expanded universe content for the first several years of the franchise. Though it was generally printed on the ordinary issue-by-issue basis, in the UK the series was printed in smaller chunks for the Star Wars monthly iteration of the series, which was alternately known as The Empire Strikes Back Weekly, The Empire Strikes Back Monthly, and Return of the Jedi Monthly at different periods of time. In almost every instance, the magazine just featured parts of issues of the normal series, but in a few rare instances, original stories were created for the magazine, some of which were written by Alan Moore, who has written some of the most recognizable and well-received comics of all time, such as Watchmen, V for Vendetta, League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, and Batman the Killing Joke. His Star Wars work is considerably well less known, but has added some of the strangest beings and pieces of lore to the franchise's mythology, often creating baffling and extreme implications for the wider lore of the galaxy if one ruminates on them for long enough. Among these beings are Dole, an octopus-like monster of the Japheth species who ruled the planet Chilet. Dole would challenge Darth Vader to a game called Firepath in a bid to kill the Dark Lord, who managed to outwit Dole and kill her instead. Another combination of Moors was Wutzek, a being that was purportedly a member of a lost race of ancient Force demons that ruled the galaxy thousands of years in the past. Han Solo, Princess Leia, and Chewbacca would happen upon an imprisoned Wutzek in a bizarre region of space named the Hell Hoop, and the mysterious being convinced Chewbacca to set him free to roam loose upon the galaxy as he did in the ancient past. In return for his freedom, Wutzek killed his former captors, who were also holding Leia and Han hostage. Perhaps the strangest contribution of Moores to Star Wars, though, would be a family of entities known as the Bedlam Spirits. As chronicled in 1982's Tilotny Throws a Shape, featured in The Empire Strikes Back Monthly number 154, Princess Leia is stranded on the dark moon of Bedlam following a run-in with the Empire, twisting her ankle and finding the remains of a stormtrooper that appeared to have been there for thousands of years. Close by, a being in the form of a green-colored woman named Tilotny appears in the sky, apparently having just given herself form, and is convinced that she has just created the universe and concepts such as time, continuity, and matter. Other beings begin to throw themselves shapes too, giving themselves form. Tilotny's siblings Horlus, Cold Dandasine, and Splendid App. As the siblings bicker about the laws of space-time and whether or not Tilotny created them too, Leia stumbles upon them, and Tilotny tries to convince the others that she created Leia, the Little Mover, as well, along with the troopers that pursue her, though her siblings aren't impressed. Tilotny angrily uses her powers on one stormtrooper, killing him, but Horlus sees this as unsubtle and vulgar, and uses his own powers to simply turn Leia's heart into diamond, killing her as well. Ashamed, Tilotny fuses the remaining two troopers together into a single writhing entity, but the spirits grow bored of throwing shapes. Before leaving Bedlam, though, the pyramid-shaped splendid app mercifully undoes Tilotny's actions, though he's inexperienced with the nature of space-time. He restores the 3 troopers, but as the troopers realize to their horror, they are stranded 8,000 years in the past. Leia wakes up in her proper time, bewildered but happy to be alive, and muses that stranger things have happened in space, though offhand she can't come to think of any. Alan Moore's bizarre Force beings, other characters, and the events related to them are basically never mentioned again in any other Star Wars stories, though they are mentioned in some comprehensive reference materials, such as 2008's Complete Star Wars Encyclopedia, which to be fair did include basically every single Star Wars character ever written up until that point, as well as 2009's Essential Atlas, which named the beings as Bedlam spirits. Also note while editing, there is another issue of the 1977 Marvel Comics series, which does show Leia having an injured ankle, which is then stated to be a reference to another story that had yet to be written at the time of that issue, but had taken place chronologically earlier. The obscurity and outlandish nature of Alan Moore's stories mean that the cosmic implications of the existence of such omnipotent extra-dimensional beings is largely unexplored throughout the rest of Star Wars, with other entities such as the Rakandan Empire and the esoteric Celestials being used by other storytellers as ancient architects of much of the Star Wars universe. Joe Bongiorno, though, in his dubiously canonical but hugely expansive Supernatural Encounters mythology, which was mentioned in the last video, heavily incorporates the story of Tilotny Throws a Shape and the Bedlam spirits into his interpretation of the origin of the Star Wars galaxy, attributing the birth of the universe to their creation of physical forms, just as the Bedlam spirits themselves speculate in the comic. One of Supernatural Encounters' first chapters recounts their story and their meeting of Leia, extending the story to explore their other first experiments with time and space, with one of the spirits accidentally creating a second time stream, which is assumedly an explanation for the existence of the Disney canon timeline that exists parallel to the old expanded universe. Typhoeum, the left-handed god. Joe Bongiorno, who I just mentioned, has a lot of interesting ideas on the more obscure and arcane elements of the Star Wars galaxy. Though I won't go into too much detail here for those who haven't watched my last Iceberg, Bongiorno wrote some minor articles for Star Wars RPGs before undergoing a massive project, Supernatural Encounters, that would eventually end up not going officially published, but was a massive treatise involving and tying together tons of obscure Star Wars lore. Bongiorno did come up with plenty of wholly original lore pieces and characters, among his favorite being a being known as Typhoeum, the left-handed god. In terms of Legends canon, when the first splinter group of Dark Jedi landed on Korriban and founded the Sith Order, their leader Ajunta Pall would be hailed as a manifestation of Typhoeum. This is Typhoeum's only mention in official Legends material, and was included in the reference book Book of Sith, Secrets of the Dark Side, written by Daniel Wallace at the behest of Star Wars author Abel G. Pena, who drew upon some of the lore from Supernatural Encounters for the book, which at the time had a bit more hope of eventually being published. The character eventually did manage to work its way into Disney canon, with a mention in the Smuggler's Guide, which mentions him as a deity with a couple of archaeological sites tied to his worship. According to the expanded Supernatural Encounters lore, Typhoeum was intended to be the firstborn of Tilotny, making him a supremely powerful being, and would be a figure of worship for the original Sith species, making him essentially the forefather of the Sith Order, and making him rank above Palpatine, Plagueis, and Darth Bane as kind of the ultimate origin of all of the evil and major conflicts in the Star Wars universe. He was also intended to be synonymous with the left-handed god mentioned in the Pandora Effect, the comic story that introduced Wutzek the Force Demon, as well as Pomojama, a deity mentioned in Splinter of the Mind's Eye, the first ever original expanded universe novel from 1978. The comic adaptation of Splinter of the Mind's Eye would show Pomojama as essentially just Cthulhu with a tentacled head, bat-like wings, and an otherwise supposedly incomprehensible and evil nature. Though Supernatural Encounters makes Typhoeum out to be a literal character with an active hand in the origins of the galaxy, and only one among a pantheon of immortal gods of the Sith, his actual presence in Star Wars continuity makes him out to be simply an obscure religious figure. My mild personal fascination with Supernatural Encounters shouldn't preclude anybody from taking such expanded lore with a huge grain of salt. None of the lore taken straight from the text of Supernatural Encounters is officially recognized as canon in any continuity, though that also shouldn't stop anyone from having plenty of fun with its ideas. Also, I just happened to find out during a late stage in editing that Typhoeum was bafflingly brought up by Stephen Colbert in a sketch for his show alongside Mark Hamill. Stephen Colbert pronounces it Typhogem, which is probably the correct pronunciation, but I think Typhoeum sounds cooler. Bosbit Matarcher. Bosbit Matarcher was a human man from Delamede who, amazingly, traveled 200 years from his time into the future 22 BBY. As chronicled in a HoloNet Life article, after buying a starship for what he believed to be a great deal, Matarcher would jump to hyperspace for a quick trip, coming back 200 years later instead of 2 hours later. He wasn't too upset about the ordeal though, as his homeworld Delamede was in a much better shape than when he left it, and was ready to return home, but this time he would fly transit. The HoloNet article featuring Matarcher's story was part of the overall HoloNet news marketing campaign, which was essentially a website that posted fun little lore articles like these leading up to the release of Attack of the Clones, providing small updates on the state of the galaxy just before the events of the film, while trying to tie in some things from the greater expanded universe. I've referenced such articles before in these Iceberg videos, such as one article that mentions Gormanda, the eccentric cook from the holiday special. Matarcher's bizarre journey through space-time is chalked up to a malfunction in his ship's relativistic shielding, which when functioning normally is an implement on any starship that keeps one time moving at the same speed relative to everyone else in the galaxy while traveling through hyperspace. Given what little I know about physics and general and special relativity though, this doesn't really make a lot of sense, but Star Wars is a space fantasy franchise where the rules of space-time can be ignored or rewritten on a whim. Last summer, people were arguing fiercely about whether or not fire should be seen in space in The Acolyte, when fire in space has been in the franchise since its inception. Relativistic shielding has only ever been mentioned in this article and once in the Attack of the Clones cross-sections book, so maybe Matarcher's story is meant to just be taken with a grain of salt and not a revelation on the bizarre temporal properties of hyperspace on a large scale. In that regard, it is probably worth noting that Pablo Hidalgo wrote this article as a nod to the classic Onion article that describes how a 134-year-old man got to be so old due to a Social Security typographical error. Jyn Skywalker. A popular activity among some avid fans of Star Wars is to ponder alternate timelines for the saga, particularly if key events from the movies or if the actions or allegiances of certain important characters ended up playing out differently than in any official timeline. Works depicting such alternate timelines are very rare from official Star Wars media, with a handful of Star Wars Infinities comics, Visions stories, the Rebuild the Galaxy animated LEGO series, non-canonical story branches of video games, and very brief scenarios from an obscure Clone Wars magazine being among the very few existing examples. Something that many fans may not be familiar with, however, is that sometimes characters in-universe have their own musings or even Force-influenced dreams or visions on how things could have played out differently in the galaxy far, far away. A key instance of this is seen in Darth Vader in The Lost Command, a 2011 Legends comic miniseries that chronicles an adventure of Vader's shortly after Revenge of the Sith. In the comic, Vader has repeated visions of what his life might have been like if he did not turn to the dark side, including an imagined future with Padme and their child, a son that Anakin named Jyn in honor of his late mentor Qui-Gon Jinn. Young Jyn Skywalker is portrayed as being a Jedi in training who supported his mother in her ascension to Supreme Chancellor, and as mentioned offhandedly by Anakin, would accompany his father once on a Sith hunting mission to Trandosha where he was supposedly nearly killed, although the way that it's written in the comic it could totally be an exaggeration or a joke. It's notable that Jyn is in fact an only child, as Vader never knew Padme was carrying twins, but it is interesting to think that Luke or Leia might have had different names if Anakin were present when they were born. Amethea Taupe. Amethea Taupe was a human female who lived during the war between the First Order and the Resistance. Hailing from the core world of Coruscant, Taupe was an influencer sympathetic to the First Order that attended a trip on the galactic star cruiser Halcyon shortly before its decommissioning, journaling her experiences such as attempting to assist the local First Order personnel with thwarting Resistance activity on the Starliner alongside her animal companion Skippy. Taupe noted many frustrations with her experience on the Halcyon, which included immense difficulties with trying to engage with First Order Lieutenant Harmon Croy concerning covert Resistance operations. Despite Taupe's persistent and obvious loyalties to the First Order, Croy did not allow her to participate in their anti-resistance plans, neglecting to follow up communications with Taupe on her datapad. Taupe also had many frustrations with her overall experience on the Starliner, including not being able to properly view entertainment during scheduled dinners due to architectural oversights, and being unable to effectively use the onboard computer terminals. Taupe's 4-hour-long holovid detailing the flaws present aboard the Halcyon on a trip which cost a minimum of 4,800 credits for 2 guests went viral across the holofeeds, but not before the Halcyon ceased operations on Batuu, likely due to a combination of the high price point and its numerous other flaws, many of which were examined in great detail by Amethea Taupe. Chubo Quay. Chubo Quay is a male amphibious alien with a muscular torso and slender legs who speaks a dialect that sounds similar to Huttese. Quay has an arrogant, combative personality which causes him to pick fights with others weaker than him, though he is made more sympathetic by knowing that his body is plagued by a worm infestation. Chubo Quay first came to be in a video by the One He Plays YouTube channel, which features Chris O'Neill and his various friends playing video games together and making jokes. In the episode Worm in the Ground Never Found, in which the guys play some games of the 1999 title Worms Armageddon for PC, they come across a level which features a muscular frog, which Lyle Burris identifies as Chubo Quay, with Zach Hadel ultimately providing him with his signature deep voice.
They did it and he done it and now I do
What's
it.
that great guy's name from Star Wars again? What's his name?
Squeakus?
Yeah.
I think they call him Dog Ears.
I'm talking about the guy to
something.
the right of Lexi Classic. He's a Star Wars character too, isn't he?
Oh yeah, that's Chubo Quay.
Chubo Quay.
Chubo Quay.
He would be referenced once again in their episode where they play Bayonetta, as the enemy Fortitudo's speech sounds similar to Chubo's rumbling baritone voice.
That sounds like the alien voice you did.
That who did?
Are you talking about Chubo Quay?
Chubo Quay.
Chubo Quay.
Chubo Quay's species is difficult to positively identify. The official One He Plays wiki and his Star Wars trading card identifies him as a Kowakian frog lizard, though he bears a closer resemblance to the unnamed frog species featured in The Mandalorian, as well as whatever species Turgle from Jedi Survivor is. Bondo Reams. Jay Coate on TikTok and YouTube may be one of the most prolific Star Wars creators on the scene right now. He's made several shorts and a couple of longer videos discussing some of Star Wars' most iconic Glup Shittos, something that I may or may not have a marked interest in. His shorts in particular tell the story of a young man and his friend having increasingly distraught conversations where Jay explains the importance of and complex interconnected relationships between some of the most obscure characters from the films. Jay's passionate attitudes towards such obscure characters is a charming post-ironic satire on just how dedicated Star Wars fans can be to their favorite background and book or comic characters unknown to those with a more surface-level knowledge of the franchise. Jay seems to have also accessed a previously untapped supply of Glup Shittos that populate the margins of Star Wars continuity. In his videos, he primarily invokes the character Bondo Reams, who is implied to carry immense power, as he purportedly resurrected Kit Fisto after his death at the hands of Darth Sidious. Other characters in Jay's vast pantheon of galactic misfits included Jinky Minus, Gaper Bingzoid, Cylon Jiggy, Peter Igloo, Gip Bipple, Gombo John Kai, Jamillion Slice, Gentry Smevens, Cablian Answer, Flaster Bix, Munch Rublian, Goofish Lutz, Nash Biblio, Bungalow Ripple, and Tinko Hondo, many of whom seem to have some kind of connection to the Tatooine pod racing scene, criminal underworld, or other factions in the galaxy, and may or may not feature in the as of yet not officially announced POW spin-off Disney Plus series. In Jay's videos, however, he appears to become more and more mentally unhinged, with his relationships with his friend and ex-girlfriend Jessica deteriorating as he delves deeper and deeper into the annals of obscure Star Wars lore. So obscure, in fact, that many of his favorite characters seem to not have yet been referenced in official Star Wars media, and the characters don't seem to match any known species in the Star Wars galaxy. Certain analogs can be parsed out though. Personally, I believe that Bondo Reams may be a Skakoan who has some kind of growth disorder or is in its juvenile stage, but even I don't want to know what kind of sick experimental cloning lab Jinky Minus crawled his way out of. Of note may be the fact that many of Jay's characters suspiciously resemble certain characters or assets from other non-Star Wars shows, but I'm pretty sure that that's just a total coincidence. Whether or not Jay's personal collection of favorite characters are a product of his ever-quickening slide into mental illness, or actually figures that will feature in an upcoming Disney Plus show, AAA video game, or officially licensed book or comic released by Lucasfilm, is yet to be confirmed. Though we can only hope that we will continue to see more of Bondo Reams and the gang, either from official Star Wars media sanctioned by Disney, or simply from the limitless spring that is Jay's imagination. Canon Man. Because I spent a significant amount of hours each week reading Star Wars books and comics, playing Star Wars games, or writing about Star Wars for my YouTube channels, sometimes I forget just how immensely cumbersome it can be to navigate the tapestry of Star Wars expanded media for people who are less experienced. If you have not been a dedicated Star Wars fan for several years, you may not have any idea what I'm even talking about when I throw around words like Legends, Disney canon, or expanded universe. Fortunately, it seems that writers at Lucasfilm have recognized this and have created an entirely new character whose whole existence appears to revolve around the idea of canon. Allow me to introduce you to Canon Man, a character first introduced in a brief comic from the 217th issue of Star Wars Insider magazine. The comic, included in the light side section of the magazine and written by Jamie Coasley, opens with Walrus Man and Pruneface discussing an issue of Galactic Inquirer that purports that Boonka Slay was a Force-sensitive child of Yakface. When Pruneface asks his friend if that's even canon, man, Walrus Man replies, "No, that's Canon Man," pointing to a gentleman with a cannon-shaped head. Though the comic itself is not canon, and Canon Man seems to be named for his cannon-like appearance, similar to many other characters of the original trilogy, such as Walrus Man and Pruneface, who originally received names based on their physical appearances, hopefully this character will decide to help out with the ever-present need to help clear up confusion surrounding Star Wars continuity. Though doing so may end up being an unfortunate case of racial profiling, as we probably shouldn't expect anyone, even Star Wars characters, to be able or willing to do something simply because of their heritage, name, or appearance. Indiana Jones. Within the myriad timelines and universes spread throughout the vast omniverse of fictional stories, relatively few times do separate franchise continuities intermingle. But when one man such as George Lucas is responsible for two long-lasting and enormous franchises, especially two that have starring roles for the same iconic actor, there's bound to be some writers and artists willing to mine such connections for storytelling and humor. Many will remember Indiana Jones's appearance in LEGO Star Wars: The Complete Saga, where he can be unlocked and purchased as a playable character after viewing the trailer for the then upcoming LEGO Indiana Jones video game. In the game, he can crack his whip and shoot his non-laser loaded pistol just like in the Indiana Jones films. Similarly, Han Solo can be played as in the LEGO Indiana Jones game. The very first appearance of our lovable archaeologist hero in an in-universe Star Wars media, though, is actually in the obscure 1997 computer game Star Wars Yoda Stories. The game features Luke Skywalker training with Yoda between episodes 5 and 6 and is essentially just a collection of little mini-games, one of which has Luke find Indiana Jones on an island with an alien named Bug Eyes. This in itself is actually a reference to a very similar LucasArts game, Indiana Jones and His Desktop Adventures, which has one ending featuring Jones traveling with Bug Eyes into outer space to collect some ancient artifacts. In Yoda Stories, Luke even mentions that Jones looks pretty similar to his friend Han Solo. A far more substantial appearance by Jones, though hardly more canonical, is the 2004 comic story Into the Great Unknown, written by W. Hayden Blackman and featured in Star Wars Tales, a series that chronicled similarly outlandish Star Wars stories with often dubious canonical status. In the story, which appears to take place sometime in the early 18th century, Han Solo and Chewbacca crash land on Earth after a bad hyperspace jump, where Solo is killed by a group of Native Americans and Chewbacca flees into the woods, where he would become known as Bigfoot. Decades later, Indiana Jones, accompanied by Short Round, would discover the Millennium Falcon with Solo's skeletal corpse in the captain's seat, hauntingly noting that something about it all seemed somehow familiar. Also, I don't really know where to put these two additional tidbits, but I wanted to mention that first, the comic's title is almost certainly a reference to Indiana Jones in the Temple of Doom, where Jones's associate Wu Han gets shot, telling Indy that he would be the first to go into the Great Unknown. Second, according to a Vanity Fair article, one story concerning the production of Return of the Jedi purports that Peter Mayhew, while filming in the forests of Northern California for the Endor scenes, had to be accompanied by crew members wearing bright orange vests so that Mayhew wouldn't be mistaken for Bigfoot and shot while in costume. I find that hilarious, and it did partially inspire the premise of the comic. Into the Great Unknown is probably the most substantial and direct involvement of Jones in a Star Wars story, but cameos and Easter eggs to Indy are very common in other Star Wars media. He appears in the LEGO specials The Quest for R2-D2 and Bombad Bounty, and the Ark of the Covenant from Raiders of the Lost Ark makes an appearance in both an episode of the Clone Wars on Ryloth and in a cargo box in Han Solo's Holler Eravana in LEGO Star Wars The Skywalker Saga. The Sankara Stones from Temple of Doom Dune, as well as Indy's Whip, Frozen, and Carbonite, can also be seen in Luthen Rail's Antiques shop in Season 1 of Andor. Certain Star Wars characters also take clear inspiration from Indiana Jones. Comic frontrunner Dr. Aphra was partially designed to be a sort of moral reflection of Indiana Jones, sharing their identities as roguish archaeologists encountering powerful ancient artifacts, with Aphra being decidedly more chaotic and morally ambiguous. One of her first iconic lines is, "It belongs in an armory," as opposed to, "It belongs in a museum." In the High Republic Adventures Phase 3 annual comic, a group of Jedi younglings watch a holo movie about a hero named Socorro Jamie, who spouts out the line, "It belongs in an archival institute." In an interview with Esquire magazine, Ford stated that Star Wars superfans would often ask him whether Han Solo or Indiana Jones would win in a fight, to which his answer was, "Me, asshole, I don't want to fucking make shit up like that. I mean, what are you asking me that crap for?" Willow. With Star Wars unquestionably being George Lucas's most well-known project, it's sometimes hard for the general public, and even many of Star Wars' most ardent fans, to give much attention to other works of Lucas that are just as fantastical and entertaining. Though most with any pop culture knowledge will be aware of Indiana Jones, far fewer are familiar with Willow, the 1988 Ron Howard-directed film written by Lucas. Featuring Warwick Davis, known to many as the performer behind Wicket the Ewok and several other smaller Star Wars roles, Willow told the tale of Willow Ufgood, a young member of the diminutive Nelwyn race who goes on a quest to protect the human baby Elora Danan so that she can one day overthrow the evil Queen Bavmorda as prophesied. Along the way, he is aided by a swordmaster turned rogue named Mad Mardigan, the sorceress Finn Raziel, and the evil Kreen's daughter Sorsha, and must battle monsters as well as spells from the sorceress, all of which are brought to life using classic and novel special effects methods, many of which were pioneered by Lucas with Star Wars. The film openly is pretty derivative of works such as Lord of the Rings and Lucas's own Star Wars stories, and was a critical and commercial disappointment at the time, though it would go on to receive a cult following all its own in the decades afterwards. The history and future of Willow as a film and a franchise are all interesting on their own for sure, but we're here to find out what the hell Willow has to do with Star Wars continuity-wise, other than the fact that they share cast members, crew, and inspirations. As it turns out, the magical realm of Anduin may not be so distant from our galaxy far away. On April Fool's Day 2006, the Star Wars website updated its encyclopedic databank to include details on the world of Anduin and the film's characters, indicating that Anduin may simply be another planet in the Star Wars galaxy, with its spells and magic being unique manifestations of the Force, not dissimilar to certain Sith spells or Dathomirian witch magic. A StarWars.com article from that same day suggests that this was done to promote a reprinting of the Shadow War Chronicles trilogy of tie-in books based on story notes from Lucas which chronicle the story of Willow after the film. The article also notes, though, that Anduin has been left inaccessible due to its position deep in the perilous Cathol Rift, but its knowledge has been recovered in the depths of the Jedi archives, even suggesting that Anduin may be the home of the midi-chlorians. It should be noted, of course, that all of these things were added to the databank on April Fool's Day, but nonetheless, these databank entries stayed up as long as the rest of the expanded universe iteration of the databank, and Lucasfilm continuity overseer Leland Chee stated in a December 2006 forum post that canonizing Willow and the Shadow Chronicles into Star Wars was once considered, but didn't imagine it coming up again, dismissing it as one of many wild ideas. Dale Hender, Antonia Corelli, and Paxton Solo. At the end of the last video, I told you a tale that, while not exactly considered official Star Wars canon, created an enormous mythology that recontextualized the origin and ancient mythos of the Star Wars galaxy through the eyes of background character Arhul Hextrophon, who allegedly went on a horrifying journey into the darkest depths of the galaxy to discover godlike entities, force demons, and transdimensional beings that all had a hand in shaping the Star Wars galaxy we know today. Years before Joe Bongiorno would undergo writing his story's supernatural encounters, however, somebody else had some novel ideas about the origins of humans and alien species in the Star Wars universe. Enter Robert J. Sawyer, a prolific Canadian sci-fi author who, at the behest of Lucasfilm and Ace Books, wrote an outline for a series of novels that would have explained the backstories for the alien species from the original trilogy, and 2 made-for-TV Ewok movies using behind-the-scenes concept art books and RPG reference materials as a guide. This outline for the novels would have involved a group of slaves who were a mix of human and alien species that we can recognize in the original Star Wars trilogy, such as the Bith, Mon Calamari, Ortolans, and Gamorreans. They were enslaved by a villainous race of insectoids called the Varlians, and a secret council led by representatives of the different species tries to find a way to freedom. The smart, strong, and charismatic human leader, Cosmo Hender, ends up working under the Varlian governor and comes across a book titled Human Exodus, which informs him of the origin of humanity in the galaxy. Excerpts from this book give background to the universe in between story segments of this outline. Beginning the tale with Another Place, Another Time, invoking an earlier version of Star Wars opening epigraph, Human Exodus tells its own story of a totalitarian society on 25th century Earth controlled by computers, a clear nod to George Lucas's first feature film, THX 1138. An underground resistance exists led by Dale Hender, who is Cosmo's ancestor, as well as Paxton Solo and Antonia Corelli. Dale uncovers records from the past detailing his own lineage to Curtis Henderson, a character from another one of George Lucas's films, American Graffiti. In order to preserve this knowledge and save his human compatriots from the robots' plans, which involve giving them serial numbers as names and controlling them with drugs, they escape aboard the 10-kilometer-long starship Ort Raider, narrowly avoiding their computer overlords and robot mining ships. Finally leaving Earth's solar system, the Ort Raider ends up falling into a wormhole and being spit out into an unrecognizable starscape. After scanning the universe's background radiation, Antonia Corelli makes the conclusion that the universe is much younger than it was in their time, and announces to the crew that it is now a long time ago, and they are in a galaxy far, far away. The crew debates whether to return to the wormhole, which is collapsing fast, but Paxton Solo, piloting the mining ship Century Eagle, won't be able to make it in time, so Antonia decides to abort, stranding the Ort Raider and her crew in this strange ancient galaxy. They soon find a world they believe they can inhabit, so they land the Ort Raider to discover a world with an atmosphere, water, and lush vegetation, but no native intelligent species. However, other ships arrive shortly after, and their intelligent occupants are recognizable to the leader as Rhodians and Bith, who had been forced to make an emergency landing due to the wormhole's effect on hyperspace. After seeing that the Rhodians are slavers, however, forcing the Bith into labor and torture, the humans attempt to escape, but are attacked by a two-headed monster not dissimilar to one found in the Willow movie. They execute a plan, though, to flood the Rhodian camp with dirty water melted from comets stored on the Ort Raider, but a Rhodian warship arrives and captures the humans and the Bith, and Antonia Corelli sacrifices herself in the struggle for her new alien friends and old human allies. They bury her on the planet, naming it Corellia in her honor, and leave with the Rhodians only to be captured again by the Varlian Empire. Cosmo Hender, inspired by this ancient story, uses the knowledge gained during his servitude in the governor's palace to unleash a plague of blood rot virus to weaken the Varlians. During the conflict, Hender also develops the ability to access the Force, for which the other slaves name him Skywalker after he learns to levitate. The blood rot disease causes changes to the life cycle of new Varlian hatchlings, causing them to grow into enormous, petulant pupas, which are the origin for the Hutts. Hender uses the Force to move aside a star cluster to allow the slaves a safe escape, though the effort mortally weakens him. The story ends with Hender's partner Sal, while caring for their son, Freedom, promises to pass on the tale of the Skywalker for many generations to come. This story outline clearly attempts to tie together much of Star Wars lore that existed up until that point, providing explanations for the presence of humans and Hutts, the early histories of many other species found in the original trilogy, and terms such as the planet Corellia's name and the name Skywalker, suggesting that Luke and Anakin can possibly trace their lineage all the way back to Curtis Henderson from American Graffiti. This story and the explanations they provide for certain aspects of the universe from a modern perspective definitely appears very meta and more than a little ham-fisted in its approach to tying together all of George Lucas's disparate projects, though honestly I feel like this story was about the cleanest and most entertaining way that it could have been done through the everything but the kitchen sink approach. Many people whose knowledge of 80s and 90s Star Wars lore is far more thorough than mine have pointed out already how this story contradicts future official information from both the EU and modern canons about the origins of certain parts of the Star Wars galaxy, and apparently even contradicted certain details present in the reference materials Sawyer used when writing the story. For example, Galaxy Guide 4 Alien Races establishes that the Rhodians were not an early spacefaring race as described in Alien Exodus. If you squint though, the broad strokes of what happened in the story could maybe fit pretty snugly within Star Wars canon, considering the story takes place so far back in the past that the Rakatan Empire and even the Celestials don't really need to have come about yet. However you want to incorporate Alien Exodus into your head headcanon or not though, it's worth noting that, of course, this proposed series of novels was never actually written, as developing negotiations within Lucasfilm established that an entirely new universe with new alien races would be used for the story, causing Sawyer to bow out of the project. The project ultimately would see the light of day as Alien Chronicles, a trilogy of novels written by Deborah Chester with an unrelated story to the one written by Sawyer. Some elements of this final story, however, would sneak their way into the Star Wars expanded universe, such as the Vis species, which was referenced a couple times in reference materials. At the end of the day, Alien Exodus is probably the closest we've gotten to having a true origin story for the Star Wars universe, or at least one that officially and convincingly leaks our world, or a fictional analog of it, to our faraway galaxy, and remains close to the hearts of many die-hard fans who have familiarized themselves with some of the franchise's most bizarre and esoteric trivia. The Star Wars saga is a fictional series of stories that takes place a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, so entering the story by any means other than observing it from the outside through films, TV shows, books, comics, or games is likely impossible. As much as we love all of our favorite Star Wars characters and tales for their political and moral struggles that so mirror our own, there isn't exactly a way for us as individuals to actually step into the story to join the galactic struggle between good and evil as ourselves. Or is there? See, most Star Wars media is not interactive, meaning that you engage with the stories but can't really change much about their outcomes, barring some special edition changes to the movies or minor details changed in reprints of books. Once a piece of Star Wars media is released, it's usually done so in its final form, with characters that act completely independently of any actions or opinions of the person that's consuming the media. But this isn't always the case. Video games by nature allow the person engaging with the medium to participate in the events taking place. For example, in Jedi Fallen Order and its sequel Jedi Survivor, the player can step into the story of Cal Kestis, changing minor details such as his appearance and clothing to a certain degree, and though the character can be killed by enemies in the game, they always have the chance to respawn and finish Cal's story, which doesn't feature any alternate endings. Similarly, The Force Unleashed and its sequel give the player the role of Starkiller, Vader's secret apprentice, which has some alternate story paths and secret endings that give the player a bit more agency. Other games still, such as Knights of the Old Republic, take player freedom in the story much further, allowing the player to create their own version of the main character with a customizable appearance and a wide variety of story points where the player can decide the fate of other characters, as well as their own journey towards the light or dark sides. However, for KOTOR and its sequel, there are technically canonical versions of the main character's appearances and story outcomes, as revealed in sources such as the Revan novel. An example of a Star Wars game where you can truly make your own unique character with full reign over your own story is the Old Republic MMO, which features 8 different story paths, each with their own multiple endings and countless different decision and dialogue trees, as well as a player character that can have one of many different species origins and body types, allowing for a truly immersive experience where you have say over the fate of the galaxy. The events of this MMO are also distanced far enough from other events in the galactic timeline and have less strictly defined canon details, so it's quite seamless to incorporate your Jedi Knight, Sith Inquisitor, or Smuggler character into the distant past of the Star Wars universe for your headcanon. Most of the LEGO Star Wars games, sadly not including the most recent Skywalker Saga, allow the player to create and name their own character from a set selection of pieces, perhaps allowing for the most authentic Glup Shittos experience of embodying an extremely strange and obscure being. Other games, though they might lack such robust customization, also allow the player to become a nameless character that nonetheless can affect the galaxy in a pre-written story, namely canon titles such as Vader Immortal, Squadrons, and Uprising. The player characters from these games may be mentioned in other stories and sources by canon characters without using any set name, allowing the player to imagine that they themselves, or a fictional version of them, could easily fit into the Star Wars galaxy. It's not just video games, however, that can allow you to become a character in the Star Wars universe. You could always start up a Star Wars tabletop RPG campaign with your friends, where your own player characters and other NPCs can have their own crazy adventures in the margins of galactic history, or be involved in galaxy-shaking events in ambitious alternate timelines. Though these scenarios could hardly be considered canon, it's not unheard of to have certain Star Wars characters originate as tabletop RPG player characters or NPCs from the personal campaigns of eventual Star Wars creators. Yord Fandar from the Acolyte and Mr. Bones from the Aftermath trilogy were both originally created by Amanda Stenberg and Chuck Wendig, respectively, in personal RPG campaigns long before they made official Star Wars media. It is, however, possible to get even closer to directly setting foot in the Star Wars galaxy as simply yourself. Opening in 1986, 1987, the Star Tours ride at Disneyland allowed park goers to enter a starship and blast off to many of the galaxy's most famous worlds and battles, with a newer version of the ride now available in Disney parks with updated content from the prequel and sequel trilogies as well as the Ahsoka show. Though the Star Tours company is alluded to as a real company within the Star Wars universe, its participation in certain climactic battles by park goers is scarcely considered canon. Similarly, vacationers can head on over to Black Spire Outpost on the planet Batuu at the Galaxy's Edge portion of Disney theme parks, or you can go and have brief interactions with First Order era galactic legends like Rey and Kylo Ren, as well as aid Hondo Ohnaka on the Millennium Falcon in a smuggling raid on Corellia as part of the Smuggler's Run ride. Because the planet Batuu is so incorporated into the lore that takes place in between episodes 8 and 9, there's little stopping one from imagining that Kylo Ren himself is thinking about you trying to shit-talk him while he's flying to Exegol to confront the Emperor like 2 months later. There are also some more obscure methods one can use to step into the Star Wars galaxy to become a Star Wars character. Other than the limitless potential of RPG scenarios bolstered by scenario and guide books, there's other print media that allows the reader to influence events, such as the Choose Your Destiny Young Reader series, but as I mentioned earlier, the nature of most books, as in novels, means that you can't exactly fully customize a protagonist character with your own name and appearance. One of the most obscure and difficult to find pieces of Star Wars media in known existence is the Clone Wars Way of the Warrior book by Jonathan Green, which was a personalized book that allowed readers to order a copy where the protagonist used their own name and a cover that displayed a character with features chosen from a set number of stock faces and hairstyles. Readers who would have been able to order this book would have been able to choose between 2 different versions of the story, where the protagonist sides with either the Jedi or Sith, fighting either Asajj Ventress or Anakin Skywalker respectively on the planet Palawa, where an ancient prophecy requires 2 champions of the Jedi or Sith to battle for a mysterious reward that could shift the tide of the war. For whichever side the reader doesn't choose, the narrative puts in their place Ventress or Anakin, so it can be imagined that a canonical version of the story exists where Anakin and Ventress duke it out on Palawa. Even then, Way of the Warrior has an extremely unique, if obscure, place in the vast array of Star Wars stories, being a piece of media that allows someone to enter the Star Wars story as their own personalized character while not being a video game or otherwise interactive experience like a theme park. As far as I can tell, it's the only customizable Star Wars book to date, though the company that printed it, Pen Wizard Books, bases their entire business model on the same style of personalized books. However you might decide to go about it, just always keep in mind that of all the Glup Shittos in the galaxy, from the bar-hopping aliens, obscure casualties of the galaxy's many conflicts, or worms crawling around in the mud, the title of Glup Shitto is not exclusive to them. You have the opportunity to become a Glup Shitto just like them, an obscure yet concrete and tangible sliver in the enormous tapestry that is the Star Wars saga. And that is the end of episode 3 of the Weird Star Wars Characters Iceberg. I gotta be honest, it is really amazing to see all of you show out for each of these videos and continue to ask for more. The nice comments and suggestions that come in almost daily for a long time are really what kept me going while working on this across many long hours, days, weeks, and months, when I have so many other projects and adult responsibilities to juggle. I've always said to people close to me that even if one day my YouTube channel gets shut down suddenly and I never get any more views or comments or ad revenue, I'd still be extremely thankful for the experience I've had having a little YouTube channel and making some fun videos that people seem to really enjoy watching. All that being said, there is something that feels a little off about being well known for making videos that are revisiting stories or lore that a lot of other people have written. Obviously, I made all of these Star Wars videos and videos about other franchises and media because I love these stories, but in time, I think something I'd like to try is branching out into making videos and content that involves my own personal ideas and projects that I've been working on for the past several years. That doesn't mean I'm going to transform this channel into like a writing or world building channel or something totally different overnight, but if you've made it this far into the video and are remotely interested in anything else I might be up to, you might be seeing some different stuff from me at some point in the future. Even with that being said, I actually do have a couple ideas for other long form or potentially Iceberg type Star Wars videos, even though the Iceberg format seems to have really gone out of fashion since I started doing them. I think a general Star Wars lore Iceberg would be fun, because when reading Star Wars stuff or going on a really deep research dive to find the weirdest Glup Shittos brings you down some truly strange rabbit holes about Star Wars that don't necessarily involve a single character, though I've definitely tried to incorporate some stuff like that into these Glup Shitto videos anyway. I also think making at least one more Glup Shitto video at some point to cover some of the characters I've missed and characters that people people have suggested, but I couldn't really dig up enough interesting lore to write a whole entry on, I think that would be a fun video to make as well. But just to be clear, it is pretty exhausting to make any 1 to 3 hour Glup Shitto Iceberg video, and to do this indefinitely until the end of time. I've actually started to meet people in person that now only know me as Glup Shitto or the Glup Shitto guy, and I'm not sure that's how I want my children to remember me in the long run as well. What I am going to do for sure though is stop publicly saying at the end of these videos that I'm going to complete a video or a project within a certain amount of time, or any concrete amount of time, because I basically never even get close to making the mark on that. Writing, recording, and editing everything you need for one of these Iceberg videos always takes way more time and energy than you could ever anticipate. But that's all whatever. If you've made it to the end of this video, I just want to say, even if you never want to watch anything else I ever make again, thanks for watching this one. Who knows when I'll pop back up on this channel next. I definitely want to put some attention back on my other channel and make some smaller Star Wars reviews for now. Whatever you decide to come back for, I hope you have a good rest of your day, and may the Force be with you.